This kid is Zik, and he woke up choosing violence. The servant complained he slept too much, and got the VIP treatment from our boy. The MC rained punches on him and kicked him around like a soccer ball. Then the great house knight Sir Halton shows up acting like he's the top dog, telling him to knock it off and daring him to try that on a real knight. The kid walked right up to him and accepted the challenge. He grabbed a tablecloth, threw it over the knight's head and knocked Halton out with a plant pot. Move out of the way because the MC would even beat up his own mom. Later at a meeting, his parents ask what had gotten into him since he had never hit anyone before. When his stepmom tells him to apologize, he says he will show his forgiveness. He grabs a sword from the wall, points it at the knight's neck and apologizes for not chopping his head off earlier. Everyone was in shock, seeing that the MC was on demon time. His dad warns that if he does that he will be locked up forever. That is when Zik proposes a duel. If he loses he will give up all his inheritance rights. The knight loved hearing that because the kid never even knew how to hold a sword, so it would be an easy win. The count thought the request was weird, but since he did not want to leave the inheritance to him, he ended up accepting the idea. The MC left the room, saying he would see them on the day of the fight. The next day while resting from his training, his half-brother Greg Steelwall went to mock him, saying there was no point in training because he would never beat a knight. After being called weak, Zik also challenged his half-brother to fight on the exact same day right after wiping the floor with Halton. His brother was surprised but accepted the duel, even being absolutely sure that Zik would not even make it out alive from the first fight. The day of the duel arrived and the knight was dying to beat the crap out of the MC. As soon as the fight begins, Halton rushes in, unleashing several attacks in a row, but Zik blocks all of them. In just 5 seconds of fighting, everyone was already mind blown, seeing the kid block those strikes. The crowd went even crazier when the MC counterattacked, using a powerful magic that destroyed half the arena. The knight was completely clueless, not knowing where he pulled that magic from. Seeing that Zik was not messing around, he started fighting seriously, and used a spell that knocked the kid out, sending him flying into the wall. Or at least that is what he thought. Zik got right back up, unleashed an insane magic and rushed at him, landing a massive hit on the knight. The attack was so strong that when Halton opened his eyes, the kid already had his sword at his neck, making the guy surrender. Everyone was in complete disbelief, trying to wrap their heads around how an elite knight lost to a loser noble. His own dad had no idea that his son even knew how to use magic. Since Zik has absolutely zero chill, he points his sword to the top of the arena and calls Greg out to fight right now. After what he had just seen, his half-brother was shaking in his boots, but since everyone saw the challenge and he did not want to embarrass himself, his dad ordered him to get down there immediately. Greg went down terrified, seeing Zik covered in blood with a smile on his face. When the fight started, the MC went all out. Greg tried to slice his neck but was completely shocked when he saw a bloody Zik grabbing the sword's blade with his bare hand. With a total psycho look on his face, the MC smacks Greg's head with the sword. Right when he was about to finish the guy off, the half-brother begs for mercy. The kid literally smelled death with the blade right next to his head. Once again, Zik was announced as the champion, leaving everyone confused, wondering how he got so damn strong. His dad was super pissed off because now he would have to give him the inheritance, but the old man's brain completely short-circuited when Zik threw the family ring away, saying he never cared about this crappy inheritance, and that he was getting the hell out of that house. The kid totally messed with the Count's head. The reason he does not care about anything and is so broken and OP is because he is the demon of strength. Years ago he was fighting against 5 heroes at the same time, and was getting absolutely clapped. When he was on the verge of dying, they let him make one last wish. He used a reincarnation spell, and managed to be reborn into this new life. That is why he got so strong out of nowhere. Before leaving, he takes a healing potion from his brother, and treats his own wounds. At the mansion's door he makes a threatening invitation that the servant could not even think of turning down. So the two hit the road with no destination but with a single goal to pass through the porty territory first, and then see where life takes them. This time, Zik decides to try and be a better person. Sometime later, farther from home, Hans calls out to Zik and says this isn't the road people normally take. The protagonist says he knows, but the normal road twists too much, and walking straight is faster. Hans points out that monsters roam this area, but MC says that's exactly why they came this way. That answer makes his servant break into a cold sweat again. A sudden noise catches the blonde boy's attention, and he tries to tell himself he imagined it. The two go deeper into the forest, while Hans keeps panicking and wishing they could leave as fast as possible. Then Zik calls his name and snaps him out of it. He puts a sword in Hans's hands and says it's time to test his skills. Confused, Hans asks what he means, but he just tells him to look behind him. He turns around and instantly freaks out when he spots a red-eyed creature hiding in the bushes. It's a goblin, and the moment it sees them, it grins, making Hans's legs go weak. Terrified, he says he doesn't know how to use a sword, and asks if he can fight with a bigger weapon instead. Zik tells him to quit whining or he'll get kicked, which might help him in the end. Fed up with the noise, the goblin jumps in to attack, and Hans starts screaming and running around even though the thing is tiny. The protagonist realizes this is going to take more work than he thought. Then the goblin turns toward him, but before it can strike, Hans lands a hit and knocks it back hard. Both Hans and the monster end up on the ground. When Hans gets up, he yells, asking why MC is doing this to him, and MC answers that he's weak. If he's only a burden, he can't be his servant. The protagonist hands him a healing potion and says he needs training so he can protect himself. Then he warns him the goblin was only knocked out and should wake up soon. After some time, empty potion bottles are scattered all over the ground. Now Hans stands with the sword in hand, ready to face the little monster again. With more confidence, he charges in fast, and the goblin grins at his bold move, which makes sense because after blocking the attack it also smacks him with its club. Annoyed, Hans glares into the creature's red eyes and toothy grin. Still, he shows real progress by slipping past the next strike with sharp, quick movement. Zyke widens his eyes, surprised, thinking that even as a beginner, Hans might actually have talent. The goblin keeps facing the wrong way, confused about where Hans went, and then senses a hard hit coming. Hans appears behind it, eyes full of bloodlust, and drives the sword straight through the middle of its head. As the monster falls, Hans lets out a heavy breath and stares at his hands, wondering if he really won. Once he sees that he did, he starts jumping and shouting like a champion. Zyke walks over and hands him another potion, then says he did better than expected. Hans beams and says it's all thanks to him. Then something catches Hans's eye, and he drops the bottle. He quickly tells Zeech to look to the side. A whole group of monsters is rushing at them. More goblins, snarling non-stop. MC watches calmly while Hans starts sweating again. Taking a few steps forward, he crouches, grabs some rocks and throws them at the monsters, leaving Hans horrified and confused. The stones crack against the goblins' heads, only making them even madder. Zeke doesn't react at all. He looks at Hans and asks why he's so shocked when the fight is only starting. Confused, Hans asks what he means, and the protagonist tells him to look behind him. The second Hans sees the giant orcs, he turns pale, while MC calmly says not to worry, they have plenty of potions. By nightfall, every monster is dead, and the two are resting by a campfire. Zyke watches his servant passed out and snoring, remembering how he earlier asked why Floral Steelwall protected Hans so much, and what connection he had to her. Hans explained that his grandmother had been the Countess's nanny, so Floral had cared about him since he was little. Zyke then recalled that his mother used to torment a servant for being that nanny's grandson. Embarrassed but curious, Hans asked what he thought of his late mother, and he answered that she had been a good person. She treated the servants well, always respected the Count, and was kind and warm to everyone around her. Back in the present, as Zeke thinks over Hans's lie, he realizes nobody at home liked him because of his mother. Considering how she treated everyone, even he feels a little sorry for his father, Florel Steelwall and Greg Steelwall, even though none of it was his fault. Then the sound of a carriage catches his attention. The protagonist gets up and wakes Hans with a few light kicks. Hans grumbles that it's not morning yet, but Zich warns him that something is coming. Grabbing his sword, Hans asks if it's goblins or orcs. A moment later, he sees it's actually a carriage. MC moves him to the front to lead the way. Sweating nervously again, Hans asks if it could be a merchant, but Zich says no, the wheels are too quiet for that. Hans guesses it has to be travelers like them, but he says nobody sane would cross this forest so late. As the sound gets closer, he stays put and wonders who it is. Then footsteps reach the boys. Two knights arrive with a horse. Zich studies them and wonders if they're holy knights. A voice from the carriage says they want to camp there for the night too. The protagonist's eyes widen when he sees who's speaking. The young woman lowers her hood and says she serves Karuna. Then she gives her name, Aine Lubella, the Saint of Mercy. Zich instantly remembers her as Karuna's saint. She's also the one who helped the blonde knight kill him in his past life. What shocks him most is meeting her here. Another person walks up and politely greets him. It's Belri Weig, Barina's aide, and a candidate to become Karuna's saint. Zich quietly notes that this man became Tasnia's killing machine in the future. Still, he shakes Belri's hand. He promised to be a better person, and that means handling old connections differently this time. Keeping things friendly, MC says there's room for everyone to camp, and Belri thanks him. Then he tells Hans to greet them too. In a flash, Hans is already kneeling at Ain's feet, introducing himself like a total suck-up. Meanwhile, the knights with them get to work and start putting up a big tent. One of them asks for help holding a pole, and Tien steps in but Hans cuts her off. With a smug grin he says he'll do it, and she simply thanks him. Hans jumps in to help the knights right away, even though he's much smaller than they are. Watching him, Zich says his servant looks way too excited. Honestly, he gets it. And Tien is very pretty, and Glenn Zandade would never pick plain-looking women for his group. A polite voice breaks Zich out of his thoughts. And Tien stands close by, and asks if she can sit next to him for a while. He agrees, and she thanks him. She also thanks him for letting her group stay there. He brushes it off, though he looks a little uneasy with her sitting so close. And Tien watches him and notices he wants to ask something. So Zich asks why she's there, and she says she's traveling around. Whenever she finds people suffering, she offers prayers and blessings. The protagonist says she's doing good work, but An humbly says she's only doing her duty as Karuna's follower. Then she asks about him, and Zich says he's searching for a way to become a good person. That suddenly gives him an idea. He asks if she can tell him how to become one. An Yuis looks interested, and Zich says she's probably the best person to ask. To him, she's the right person for that question. After thinking a bit, An says there are many ways to be kind and good. She asks if he has any special talent, and he says he's very good with physical strength. Tien tells him to use that strength to help people who need it. Zich confidently says he'll start looking for someone to help tomorrow. The next day, everyone heads into the city. While walking with Tien, Bellry points out that a lot of shops are being rebuilt, and she agrees. Then he tells her Karuna gave him an order he needs to carry out. Tien smiles and wishes him luck. He tells her to stay safe, and she says she will. Later though, she ends up troubled. After entering an alley, Ein tells her knights she heard a scream there, and they move to check it. Then something stops her cold. A young man is being beaten while others just stand around and watch. One knight rushes forward and orders the attacker to stop. Ein can only stare, shocked that Zich is the one doing it. After things calm down, she reminds him that she told him to help people in need, so she can't understand why he helped a bunch of troublemakers instead. The protagonist says they looked like they needed to be corrected. Tien firmly tells him that from now on he should help weak people, not hurt others, starting by apologizing to the boy he hit. Sitting there with a swollen face, the boy says he's fine. He introduces himself as Soon, and says he's very thankful, Tien saved him. Tien asks why he was being attacked, and whether Zich and the others were trying to steal his shop. Soon explains that a group called Siren Corporation has been bribing people, even the mayor, to get what they want. He says the shop may look old to others, but it's precious because it holds memories of his grandfather and father. When he refused to give it up, the group turned violent. Now he doesn't know what to do, moved by his story. Tien says he doesn't need to worry anymore. She promises to meet Porty's mayor at once and settle this. One knight warns that Karuna's followers shouldn't interfere in politics, but Aini says she can't ignore this, and vows to fix it. She hurries off and her guards rush after her. Zich watches them go, feeling that this will end badly. The next day, while walking through the city, Hans asks what MC is thinking about. He says he's been thinking about Aini's words on helping the weak, because it seems like she doesn't fully understand that herself. As he pinches Hans's cheeks, he adds that he's also worried Aini still hasn't come back to camp. Then they notice a crowd gathered around a wanted notice on a wall. They move closer and hear people saying the person in the picture murdered the deputy mayor. Zicha's eyes widen at once when he sees Aini's face on the poster. Hans is stunned, but the protagonist is sure something is off. The townspeople whisper that she's a witch from Kuruman, and that the city is in chaos because of her curse. They say it's safer to stay locked inside at night. Panic spreads fast and everyone runs home to hide. Hans nervously asks what he thinks happened. Zich says the whole thing feels strange, so they'd better leave too. Later the two move through the city in total silence after dark. MC tries to remember whether anything like this happened in his last life, but he doesn't recall any curse on Porty or Aini killing anyone. He starts wondering if things changed because he met her this time. Then Hans suddenly gets his attention, warning that someone's following them. A leg that clearly isn't human steps toward them, and the creature makes a strange sound. It's a zombie woman. Terrified, Hans asks if it's really undead, but Zich charges without hesitation and cuts it down in under 5 seconds. Dropping to his knees, Hans asks why something like that is roaming the city. He says he doesn't know, but something is definitely wrong. Elsewhere, someone says they're glad no one got hurt. Two guards with torches tell the boys they'll handle the corpse and thank them for the help. Then one of them says they'd better get indoors and hands his torch to Hans. He warns them to be careful in case the witch's curse reaches them too. After that, the guards leave with the undead body. Hans asks if the protagonist really thinks Aini is a witch, and the protagonist says no. He's sure the real culprit is framing her. Hans asks how he can be so certain. MC says it's because Aini is B, but he stops mid-sentence. Hans immediately asks if he knows something about her he's hiding. Zich bluffs and says you can tell just by looking at her that she's a good person. Then he hears something. He spins around at once. Hans asks what he heard, but he says nothing, and suddenly runs the opposite way from home. A moment later, he reaches a building nearby. At the door he finds Aini, and asks what she's doing there. Hans can only stare, seeing her hiding there alone with nowhere to go. Then the three of them head back home. After she bathes, Zich asks if the clothes he lent her fit. Tien says they do, and the protagonist tells her, Hans went out to buy dinner and should be back soon. Then he asks what happened to the knights who were supposed to protect her. Tien only lowers her head, so he asks if they were sent on another mission. She says it's all her fault. Tears fall as she admits the knights are gone because of her. Zich barely reacts. He hands her the wanted poster, and asks if it has anything to do with what happened. In panic, Tien says she isn't a witch. Tien says he knows, that Faith catches her off guard, and he adds that he knows she wouldn't do something evil. Still, he wants to hear what happened after they last met. Tien says she'll explain. Then the story goes back to the day she successfully solved the shopkeeper's problem. Unlike the mayor, who came off greedy, the deputy mayor seemed honest and dependable. Then the deputy mayor suggested they treat their guests to a meal. So after a brief pause, the mayor agreed to have dinner prepared for everyone. Even though she didn't want to stay, Tien said she'd accept if it wasn't a burden. The holy knights were starving, and her real mistake was going to see the mayor in the middle of the night. After dinner, they went to thank him for his kindness, but when they stepped into his office, they knew something awful had happened. Her knights moved in front of Antien at once to shield her, while the mayor, standing among dead bodies, said she had seen something she never should have. Stunned, one knight yelled for Antien to look behind him, where Belri Weig's statue floated in a purple glow. Antien realized the mayor was just Belri Weig's puppet. With a smile, the man said she had finally figured it out. Shaken, Yini asked what he was planning. Then the bodies on the floor began to rise, and the mayor revealed he meant to sacrifice her to the statue. The undead rushed the three of them, and the knights fought back at once, with Ani's holy power protecting them. But Ani quickly saw there were too many undead there, and she likely wouldn't be able to stop them all. One of the knights turned and asked if she was alright, then noticed a zombie coming up behind her. He shouted for her to look back, but there was no time, so he shoved her away and stepped in to take the hit for her. Sitting down, Zich asks if she's talking about Belri Weig's followers. Aini confirms it. They serve an evil god, crave chaos and destruction, and attack in his name. Interested, he asks what they want in Porti, and she says she thinks they're preparing a ritual. That's because the words carved on the statue behind the mayor said, "I offer this city to Belri Weig." Zich acts like he understands, and Hans asks what he's not saying. He answers that hidden statues are probably scattered across the city, and the book the mayor had must be the trigger that activates them. Ein says that after escaping the mansion, she tried to get help from the Karuman temple, but the city had been sealed off and she couldn't reach anyone. Crying again, she says she has to stop the ritual, and the protagonist tells her he'll help. Then he asks if that counts as a good deed. Ein says yes, but worries she's dragging him into danger. Zich tells her not to worry. Tomorrow night they're going to the mayor's mansion. He tells her to return to her room and get some rest. When he opens the door, he finds Hans listening in, though Hans quickly denies it. Zich ignores that and says he has a job for him, then quietly whispers the plan in his ear, so Ain can't hear. Whatever he says leaves Hans stunned. The next night, two men are already lying unconscious in the mayor's backyard, while MC and his partner slip inside through a balcony, carrying Ain. Zich asks if she's alright, and she says yes. They hurry through the halls, and stop at the door to the room where she last saw the mayor. On says the statue was inside, and he says he can sense something evil behind the doors. Without waiting, the duo goes in and finds the mayor by the window, wrapped in purple light. On says that's the man who killed the deputy mayor. Zich steps in and attacks, pinning the man with his sword, but the mayor doesn't react at all, which throws the protagonist off. Onse warns him to be careful, because undead could appear. Zich plants a foot on the mayor's back and shoves him down, saying she blamed the wrong man, because the person on the floor isn't the real mastermind. Eined is stunned because she was sure she had it right. Then a purple aura starts spilling from the mayor's mouth, and MC smiles. They've just found the real one behind everything. The figure steps forward and says he didn't expect Ein to come back on her own. The true villain is the deputy mayor, who was never dead at all. Shocked, Ein says she was certain he had died, then notices he's holding the book tied to Belri Weig's power. With a dark smile, the deputy mayor says the book is the key to the offering ritual, and Ein asks how he got it. Zich says it all makes sense now. The mayor was only taking orders until he was disposed of, just a puppet, not a true follower of the evil god. The one pulling the strings from the start was the deputy mayor. Ein breaks into a sweat and says this can't be true. Then she asks what he did to the holy knights. Laughing, he says she doesn't need to worry about them anymore, because their bodies are feeding the fish. The only thing he still wants to know is who the boy beside her is, and whether he's some hidden guard. Zeke says he has nothing to do with Karuaman. Curious, the deputy mayor asks why he's here. Then, he says he doesn't owe an answer to someone who worships a fish head. Annoyed, the man asks if he really just said that because he's begging to be punished by Belri Weig. Smirking, Zich asks why he'd fear a fish head. That sends the man into a rage, and he swears the protagonist will pay for that insult until his last breath. Undead appear, and the deputy mayor orders them to kill the boy, but leave Aini alive. The creatures rush in to attack. To help, Aini blesses MC and tells him to be careful. With his skill active and her protection on him, Zich can easily slip past their attacks, then cut them down, one after another. With his sword shining blue, the man with the book watches his minions fall and can't believe it. No one should be wiping out undead that easily. At the same time, Zich realizes some of his mana has returned. Mocking him, he asks if that's all, or if more monsters are coming. Shaking with anger, the deputy mayor says his cockiness won't save him, because the ritual is already ready. The protagonist says he doubts that, leaving the man stunned. With a grin, he says he'll track down every hidden statue in the city and destroy them. The man says that's impossible, but Zich points out that someone from Karuaman surely can. He reveals he already knows the deputy mayor guarded the statues until now. Anin steps closer and asks if that's really possible. MC confirms that once they destroy all the statues in Porte, they just have to come back to the mansion and destroy the last one. Furious, the Belri Weig follower calls him trash and orders the undead to rise and attack again. Zich quickly draws his sword again and keeps striking, cutting through the creatures non-stop, which only makes the deputy mayor angrier and Aini more worried. Moving to Aini's side, he scoops her into his arms and tells her not to move if she doesn't want to get hurt, because they're getting out of there. Sweating, Aini says the way out is blocked. Zeke runs straight for the window while she tells him to wait. Ignoring that, he smashes through the glass with his back, shielding her from the impact, while the deputy mayor realizes he's lost the pair and decides to go back to his plan. The next day, people spread posters through the city, shouting that the witch Aini murdered the mayor. Residents rush over and grab the flyers off the ground, shocked by the news and confused by the extra face drawn on them. That's when we learn Zeke is being labeled the witch's subordinate. Looking at his own wanted poster, he says the picture looks pretty good, and that even this sketch can't hide how handsome he is. Still, one thing feels off. Chewing on bread, Zeke figures the deputy mayor just got lazy and didn't draw it better, then tells Aini to stop stressing. They need to eat first. She asks where he got the food, and he says he borrowed it from somewhere because he had no choice when he can't show his face. Aini drops to her knees with a sigh, and the protagonist quickly says he didn't steal it, he took it on credit. She asks if that still doesn't need the owner's permission. Zich says she can't always live by the rules, but later he'll go back and pay double to make up for it. Then Aini asks where Hans is, and MC says he sent him to do something he definitely wasn't happy about. As she eats, Aini asks where they're headed now, and Zich says the next step is finding the statues. Still unsure, she asks if he even knows where to look. He says they should start in the slums because he has one place in mind. Later, they reach that spot. 3 young men are gathered in an alley, and the protagonist walks up, getting one boy's attention by saying it's been a while. The second they see Aini, all 3 panic, yelling that she's the witch and that Zich really is her subordinate. They turn and bolt at once, not letting them escape. MC leaps up and lands on one boy while blocking the other 2. Smiling, he tells them there's no need to run, he's not going to bite. The 2 freeze in terror, sure they're about to die. Looking at them, Aini says she knows these boys from the day Snock was beaten up. Sicheng notices the 3rd boy trying to run, then turns and asks if he's really the type to ditch his own friends. With his hand on his head, the boy has nowhere left to go. The boy says they're criminals, and being seen with them will only cause trouble. Grinning, Zich says that's fine, he's actually looking for people to work for him. The boys ask why they should help, but once they hear they'll get paid really well, their eyes light up, and all 3 rush in asking what he needs. Zeke starts by asking if they know anyone who suddenly got sick or died, like their life was being sucked out. 2 of them immediately glance at the red-haired boy, but he turns away and claims he knows nothing. Zeke calls him out, asking why he's hiding it when there's money on the table. When the boy still stays quiet, the protagonist grabs him and puts him in a chokehold, hoping that jogs his memory. Even then, the kid insists he knows nothing. To everyone's surprise, Aini walks up, kneels, and politely asks him to tell them what he knows. MC stares at her, wondering what she's doing. Aini tells the boys that hard as it is to believe, the whole city is in danger, and could become a city of death overnight. The red-haired boy snaps that this is her fault, that the undead are roaming because of her. He adds that if not for Aini, his brother wouldn't be sick, finally admitting what he'd been hiding. Zeke tells him to take them to his brother, but the boy refuses and asks why he should. Annoyed, he grabs him again and decides they're going to his house anyway. It's out in the distance, in a cabin that seems abandoned. Andy says she's done all she can, but the sick boy won't recover until the source is removed. Then Zite asks the red-haired boy if anyone went after his brother. The boy says yes, he saw the attacker with his own eyes. The protagonist asks who it was. The boy narrows his eyes. Shocked MC still doesn't get it after seeing the man. Then he reveals it was the shopkeeper, the same one he once helped beat up. Soon, shaken, Andy asks if he's sure, and the boy says yes. The man she saved is the one who made his brother sick. He says that if she hadn't stepped in, he might have been able to save him. Zite cuts in and tells him to calm down and explain exactly what happened. He needs the full story. The boy says that one day he got home later than usual, and George was gone. Since George is weak, he rushed out to find him, scared something had happened. Near an alley, he heard a voice and saw someone using some strange power on his brother. The masked attacker noticed him and ran. He chased after him and caught up, then yanked off the mask while demanding to know what he did to George. That's when he saw the attacker was Soon. Zite asks if George got sick from that day on, and the boy says yes. At first he thought things were fine because there were no wounds, and George woke back up. But then George grew thinner, kept saying he had no strength, and eventually started fainting. The protagonist asks if that's why he tried to get help. The boy confirms it. He planned to steal Soon's dagger and trade it for his brother's cure, but Annie ruined that plan. Looking hurt, Annie apologizes and says she misunderstood because she thought a helpless person was being attacked. The boy asks if she thought that because several people were hitting Soon, because they were from the slums, or just because he looked like a thug. The question catches her off guard, as he asks if that's how she decides who's strong and who's weak. Zite steps in and tells him that's enough. He says Annie spent her whole life sheltered, so she doesn't know much about how the real world works. Then he asks why the boy doesn't hate him too, since he turned on him the moment Annie showed up. The boy says it's because Zike was the first person to help them without caring where they came from. That answer leaves MC quiet. After stepping outside, he asks Aini what she thinks. She says she felt Belry's filthy energy on both Victor and George, so George is clearly an offering. He says that gives them a starting point, and he's already figured something out. They head to the shop, where Soon is busy moving boxes around. All of a sudden, he senses something off. He opens the basement door and goes down to check. At the back, He thinks it was probably just a rat. Then Zyke suddenly appears behind him and asks if he remembers him. Soon wonders what the protagonist is doing there. MC says he didn't get to finish beating him last time, so he came back to end it. This time, no guardian angel is coming to save him, only an angel from hell. Soon gets slammed to the floor and screams in agony. He begs for his life and asks what he even did. Zich tells him to ask the fish head behind him. Maybe another beating will help him remember. Bruised and panicked, Soon asks if he thinks he follows Bellry. He swears he doesn't. Zich says he knows that. Soon isn't a follower, just trash who hangs around them and picks up their leftovers. Amy watches sadly from the side. Then her eyes widen when the protagonist draws his sword. He says that now they've found the statue, they have no use for Soon anymore. Terrified, Soon blurts out that he knows where the others are, the other statues. Zich grabs him by the collar and orders him to talk, but Soon smirks and says that kind of information isn't free. He wants a promise that he'll walk out alive. Noticing MC's expression, he asks why he's staring like that, and whether he finally understands the situation. Furious, Zich says Soon is worthless scum, and that he should have killed him long ago. Inky asks if he's really that far gone, and Soon fires back, asking if she thinks he's some kind of fool. He mocks her too, saying that's exactly why everyone calls her a witch. Hinky sadly asks why he's doing this when he said he wasn't one of Bellry's followers. Soon answers that it's all for money. He hated his old rotten shop and everything his father and grandfather left him, so when he got one chance to throw it all away, he took it. Zich cuts him off and tells Unni they're wasting time, while Soon keeps demanding safe passage if they want the locations of the other statues. He says that's too bad, because he just changed his mind. He's going to kill him right here. He can find the places himself, and it's obvious Soon is just bluffing. Soon panics and begs Anin to stop him, calling himself helpless. Ain stays quiet for a moment, then tells Zich to deal with him. Soon screams and begs for mercy, then suddenly goes silent, making it seem like he's dead. Ain looks sick after seeing it, but Zich walks over and tells Soon that if they ever meet again, he'll wish he had died. Then he leaves, abandoning the injured man on the floor, so scared he nearly wets himself. After that, the protagonist returns to the red-haired boy's cabin. Anishik is sitting on the porch, lost in thought. MC walks up and offers her some bread, then asks if she's okay. Annie admits she's been judging people wrong this whole time. Even with Soon and Victor, her bias got in the way, the exact thing Karuna taught her not to do. Zich asks if guilt is eating at her, and says she doesn't need to carry it forever. She apologizes for how she acted before, and says she should be the one asking him for advice. While eating, he says he doesn't have much to offer beyond what she already knows. Words alone won't help her much anyway. She has to get past this herself, either accept it or let it go. If she clings to guilt too long, it'll only get worse and worse. Aini says he's much more mature than she expected. Zich asks what she said, but she brushes it off and says it was nothing. They should focus on finding the next statue. Still downcast, she apologizes for not being more helpful. The protagonist tells her not to be ridiculous. From here on out, she has the most important job. That night, during a storm, inside another house, Amtin asks how Zich knew the fallen men would be there. He explains they were all lured in with money, just like Soon. Then he tells her to quickly pour her holy power into the brush and paint the statue. She obeys at once, and the brush glows bright yellow. When she's done, she says it's finished. Zich thanks her and says he's done too. The statue is now covered in symbols. Ankin places her hand on the stone and completes the last step. Afterward, she asks if they should leave. MC says her power has already spread through the underground water, so this place is fine and they should move on. As she looks back, Ankin wonders if that really will be enough to stop the ritual. Meanwhile, at the mayor's mansion, the one behind the ritual sits at his desk as power runs through his body. Looking over the wanted posters he spread across the city, he smiles at Amy's poster and hopes she comes back soon. Elsewhere, someone is running while carrying another person. It's Bellry with Hans, and Hans warns that he's about to throw up. Bellry suddenly stops and tosses Hans to the ground, telling him he'll have to go on alone. The boy yells that he can't be left behind, but the man is already gone. Then a pair of red eyes lights up in the bushes behind him. Terrified, he takes off running and calls out the man's name. At the same time, Zich and Ansi keep moving through the city. Ansi can't stop worrying about whether their plan will really work. They've spent days tracking down statues and painting every one they found. Even so, she still has no idea what those magic symbols actually mean. All at once, the two hear a scream. A zombie jumps out, and Zich notices this one seems different from the others. That proves their work wasn't for nothing. Once they bring the monster down, he points out that there are also far fewer undead in the city now, and he gives Ansi the credit. She smiles, relieved to hear that Zich smiles too, as he watches her. Then he asks if she doubted the magic circles. Flustered, Ain says she does trust him. She just never heard of a method like that before. She adds that she had no idea it could be that strong. Hiding that he made it himself, the protagonist changes the subject. It's time to head for the main statue at the mayor's mansion. Now that every other statue has been painted, the ritual should be much weaker, and the deputy mayor is likely waiting there at the center of it all. Unlight grabs her weapon and says they should go right now. The two quickly reach the mansion and go straight inside without waiting. Back at the big doors, Anlight says she can feel a huge flow of energy from the room beyond. Zeech tells her to stay behind him. He's taking point from here. Then he pushes the door open. They step in carefully, when a beam of purple light suddenly shoots out and blasts through the window behind Anlight, making her jump. Zeech admits that attack caught him off guard, and Anlight quickly asks if he's hurt. He says he's fine, and it wasn't serious. What matters is that he never sensed the thing with the scythe before it attacked. Shaken, Orny asks why monsters that strong are in there. The shadowy creature rushes them again without pause. Zeech blocks it with his sword and says the monster is built for one thing, killing. A short fight breaks out, but MC overwhelms it with a fast string of strikes and finishes it off. Then more creatures start rising from the ground. Ein tenses up and warns him to look behind. Another monster is already swinging its scythe for a killing blow. Zeke slips away in time and says its assassination skills aren't bad, but they won't work on him. As the clash seems to end, Ein asks how shadow monsters got here. He says Bellry must have summoned them. That only makes her more uneasy. Then the deputy mayor steps forward and says there's a simple reason. The ritual never lost its power the way she believed. The mansion starts to break apart, and Zeke says the ritual must be starting. Wide-eyed, Ein asks if everything they did meant nothing. The protagonist calms her and says their work will matter, but first they have to get out alive. He draws his sword and activates his power, then smashes open a path through the floor to make an escape route, setting off a small explosion. He grabs a Li Yunqing and tells her to hold on tight, then sprints for the opening, as the whole place falls apart around them. Through the wreckage, Bellry's statue appears, glowing and floating on its own, showing that it's suspended above a huge mass of water. As he walks closer, the deputy mayor asks if they don't think it's beautiful. That makes Ain burn with anger. Not bothered at all, the man asks why she won't call him by his real name. He lets out a mocking sound and asks if that look on her face is because this is only the beginning. Then he sneers that the markings they put on the statues did absolutely nothing. Anising is stunned and asks how he knows about the drawings. He explains that this was part of his plan from the start. He left the statues there for them to find, so she would come to him. Since luring them in wasn't hard, all he had to do was make sure they'd return on their own. And to do that, he just had to make them think stopping the ritual was working. He knew they'd come after the last statue too, because someone warned him this would happen. Anising is shaken by everything she hears. MC asks if that means he'd been spying on them, and the man says MC should be grateful instead. He made the wanted posters sloppy on purpose, so he could move through the city more easily. Now in just a few hours, everyone in the city will join his army, and Aini is welcome to join it too. Aini glares at him with open disgust, and says she won't let him do whatever he wants. Smiling, the man says that leaves him with only one choice, good old brute force. Anine turns to Zich and thanks him, which catches him off guard. She says that without him she never would have made it this far, so she'll hold the zombies back while he escapes. Annoyed, the deputy mayor says she should be angry at the protagonist for dragging her into this even though he knew the truth. Zich then admits he always knew the magic circles wouldn't affect the ritual. He also knew the deputy mayor was using all of this to draw Anine to Bellry. The man says that's a bluff, otherwise MC would never have brought her back here. He smiles and says he did it to buy time. That leaves the enemy completely confused, until the protagonist explains he was buying time for someone. The one man the deputy mayor should know well. After all, that friend came from Tasnius. Not far away, Bellry cuts through a group of zombies and wipes out every last one of them, proving why they call him a killing machine. The deputy mayor insists Bellry couldn't have returned because he made sure Bellry had already left Porty. Still smiling, Zich says he asked Bellry to come back. Furious, the deputy mayor unleashes his power and shouts that no one survives once they're caught in the ritual. The underground water starts bursting upward non-stop, and a giant blue sea serpent rises out of it. Zich tells Anane not to panic and to stay behind him, but she raises her staff and calls on her power, saying that even if she's weak, she'll fight beside him. MT smiles and says that's good to hear. Blessed and ready, he charges straight in and drives his sword into the great serpent, striking the center of its mouth. Water blasts everywhere, while the deputy mayor watches from close by. When the pair vanishes from sight, he says the attack took a lot of power, but at least it worked. Then someone starts rising out of the water, and both Zich and Aine come out completely fine. Shocked, the deputy mayor asks how that's possible. He says even a massive water pillar can be turned into a waterfall if the pressure is suddenly spread out. Then someone else approaches. Bellry has finally arrived. Trying to stay composed, the deputy mayor stammers that Bellry will just become another sacrifice, but he's cut off at once by a hit that teaches him to shut his mouth, and his book falls to the ground. The book has a strange face on it, and it looks even uglier when Bellry strikes it. Bellry says that's exactly what you'd expect from one of Bellry's artifacts, disgusting to the very end. Then the base of the floating statue drops hard into the water, and the heavy crash makes everyone stop. Smiling, the deputy mayor says the final judgment has finally begun. Bellry says that can't be possible since the ritual's key was destroyed, but the enemy explains that if enough life force enters the city's underground water, the ritual starts on its own. Once that happens, it won't stop until it swallows the whole city and forces water filled with Bellry's energy up from the ground. Hearing that, the three heroes fall silent. After a moment, the deputy mayor wonders why nothing is happening. Zeech then reveals that the magic circles he drew on the statues were real after all. They truly could stop the ritual. With a mocking grin, he asks the man how it felt to enjoy that little burst of hope. By the next day, the city is safe and sound. Bellry thanks Zeech for the help. Because of the note Hans sent, he knew Aine was in danger, and he's glad he made it back in time. The protagonist says he planned everything around how long Bellry would need to return, even if that put Hans through a rough time. As they part ways, MC says he has to leave, though Aine tells him he can stay and rest a bit longer. He turns the offer down and says he's in a hurry. He's already chosen the next place he and Hans are heading to. Inside the temple, Aine tells Bellry that she found out Zeech is the eldest son of House Steelwall. Startled, Bellry asks if she means the family called the Fortress of Steel. Aine smiles and says yes, though she's still not sure Hans wasn't joking. Bellry rests a hand on his chin and says that no matter what, it's best to keep him hidden from the Order. If they learn he taught them the magic circle that can stop the Bellry ritual, they'll come after him for revenge. Aine agrees that hiding Zeech is the smart move. Bellry then asks to be excused since he has to meet the Pope, and Aine thanks him again for his help. But someone else has been listening nearby. Stepping forward, the knight who killed the protagonist in his past life asks Aine for permission to speak. Curious, she asks who he is. With a smile, he introduces himself as Glenn Zenard. Glenn Zenard. Noticing the emblem on his armor, Aine says he must be the honorary knight sent to aid the Order. He bows and says it's an honor to serve the Order of Karumen. Aine then asks how he knows who she is. Glenn Zenard says others told him she was a candidate to become Saint of Kartwiman. Then he asks if something is troubling her, because he's willing to help with anything. Aine, a little embarrassed, says nothing is really wrong, she's just tired. The knight apologizes for holding her up when she should be resting. As she leaves, Aine says it was nice meeting him. He watches her go, then his face darkens and he mutters that something has changed. Meanwhile, near the mining town of Seoul, a troll is getting absolutely wrecked by Hans, who grips his sword and pants for breath. Zikram walks up and says fighting trolls is starting to feel easy now. All of a sudden, they hear someone cry out for help. A small boy is running from a pack of goblins. Zik rushes in right away and cuts them down. The boy is left staring in shock. When he comes up to them, he thanks them for saving him, and Hans asks why goblins were after him. The boy explains he was doing adventurer training. That only confuses them more, so he explains that he's a miner right now, but he dreams of becoming an adventurer. That's why he's been training with a teacher. Then the man shows up out of nowhere, yelling because his student lost to a few goblins. Before leaving, the boy asks the protagonist's name so he can repay him someday. Before he even gets an answer, he introduces himself as Snock. Zik gives his name too, and Snock says they'll meet again. After that, Hans asks what an adventurer even is. Still puzzled, Memsi says it doesn't matter, they need to get back to training. He turns to Hans and tells him to fight the huge orc standing behind him. Elsewhere, Snock is with his teacher, who tells him to keep his mana active while they walk. But before he can do it, he trips on a rock and falls. His teacher snaps and asks how many times he's going to keep falling. Snock has scraped his knee, and the man is clearly sick of it. Finally, he says training is over for today, which catches Snock off guard. The boy worries and says he still needs more practice, but the man won't listen. Then a cute little mole catches Snock's eye. Knowing it could be in danger there, he gently tells her to go back to her family. Snock starts to leave, but the mole follows him. He turns back and asks if she has nowhere else to go. After wondering what he should do, he decides to take her with him. Elsewhere at a restaurant, Zich and Hans are eating when Hans says he has a question. He asks why he picked Seoul as their next stop. The protagonist is impressed he remembered that, and Hans fires back that he's not an idiot. MC answers that a certain day is getting close, but says Hans wouldn't get it even if he explained. So he puts it simply, it's the day Seoul is fated to be destroyed by Noen, the god of destruction. Then we cut back to Snoke walking through town, trying to name his new pet, and he decides to call the little mole Noen. From then on we move to a dark cave, where Snoke's teacher is speaking with a hooded figure who thanks him for his help, and hands him a bag of gold. The man's eyes light up the second he sees it. He asks if the job is finished now that he led Snoke to the mole. The hooded figure says yes, and the man says he can finally stop acting like a teacher. The stranger agrees and thanks him again, saying the plan can move forward right away. The next day, a merchant tells Hans the stone in front of him appears only once every 1,000 years. Hans is stunned and asks if that's true. Then a saleswoman calls out, saying a blouse would look great on him, while another vendor pushes grilled meat with special sauce. Hans gives in, grabs it all, and walks up to Zich to ask how he looks in the new outfit. He wonders how Hans managed to resist this place for so long. Nearby, an old man says he always knew Snoke would get fooled sooner or later. Another says he heard the so-called adventurer teacher quit yesterday, and Snoke took it so hard he won't even leave home. Hearing that, Zich realizes he knows that name and immediately remembers the boy he met before. What in thinking it over, he concludes the strange energy he felt from that man must have meant he was a fake. Right then, Hans comes back carrying a bag of food and asks the protagonist to try some. Later, at Snock's house, the boy lies in bed with heavy dark circles under his eyes. No Yoon comes over and he asks if his little pet is bored. The mole cuddles into his hand. Snock says she's lucky she doesn't have to worry about anything. Suddenly the little animal lifts her paw, then climbs onto his face, and he jokes that maybe she's getting back at him for being bored. Then a sound grabs his attention, and he gets out of bed to check it out. At the door he wonders why it opened on its own. He decides to just close it, even though he feels like someone else is in the house, and a hooded figure is right behind him. Meanwhile, Hans and Zich are walking through the city, smiling. Hans asks if the food he bought isn't amazing. MC, on the other hand, asks if he can please stop wearing those clothes. Hans looks a little hurt and says the shopkeeper told him the blouse suited him. Then Zeke spots something moving across the rooftops. It's two hooded figures, and one of them is carrying an unconscious Snock. Hans asks what he's looking at, and he says they're people, but it's obvious he recognized the boy they're carrying. Realizing Snock has been kidnapped, he decides to go after them, and figures this might be a chance to help someone. He stops Hans and tells him to go home. Hans tries to protest, but it's already too late. Zyke is already sprinting and leaping across the rooftops, calling out to get the kidnappers' attention. When they ignore him, he asks if they can talk for a second, because he needs to speak with the boy they're carrying. Instead, one of them throws a dagger at him. Zich catches it cleanly, and throws it right back. It nails one of the men, and he tumbles off the roof with Snock, and another hooded figure. Landing in front of them, Zich asks who they are. When nobody answers, he asks again. One of the men points at him, and orders the others to kill the obstacle, and they charge without hesitation. That annoys the protagonist, since he wasn't trying to kill anyone. He grabs one of them, and repeats that he asked a question, then slams the man into the ground, wondering why nobody will just answer. Another attacker rushes in at once, but Zich slips past him and counters right away with a knee strike. Meanwhile, the third kidnapper uses the chaos to run off with Snock. Syke notices right away, and mutters that this guy is making things harder than they need to be. Without wasting a second, he chases after him. As he wonders where the man is headed, he soon realizes it's the abandoned mine. Just before he can go in, something blocks his path, a whole crowd of hooded people. Syke impatiently asks who they are, but once again, nobody answers. They just attack. Sometime later, MC has beaten the entire group, and strawberry juice is smeared across his cheek. Looking over them, he notes that their weapons and fighting skills are no joke, so he needs to learn where they came from. He came to this city to stop a disaster, so this can't be a coincidence. Then something catches his eye. One hooded figure starts getting back up, and Syke quickly steps in to ask if all this has something to do with Noan, the tyrant of the earth. Inside the mine, Snock wakes up and finds his mole beside him. He looks around, confused, and wonders where he is. Then the hooded figure suddenly appears, and yanks the mole from his hands. Snock desperately begs him not to leave Noan alone. The kidnapper grabs him by the neck and lifts him into the air, saying this is interesting. He thought Snock was a coward. With a smile, he asks if the boy found courage because of the mole, then throws him hard to the ground. Struggling up, Snock asks what he means. Then he quickly realizes he knows this place, it's the collapse well. The man walks closer and asks what's wrong, then wonders if Snock is searching for something beyond the barrier. Snock turns, and the kidnapper says he must be wondering how he knows that. He says it was easy to tell from the sadness in Snock's eyes when he stood before his father's grave and tree. Snock asks if he knew his father. The man says yes, then tells him to look at the glowing point ahead. He explains that it's the sealing stone that keeps the mine monster trapped, the very stone Snock's father disturbed by accident while exploring. That mistake woke the monster and caused the tunnels to collapse, burying his father. The man presses him, asking if that truth doesn't make him furious, since the reason he lost his father, and had to become a miner even though he hates it, is the monster of the mine. Snock starts shaking, and his eyes turn red, handing the mole back. The man tells him to pour that rage onto the little creature in front of him. Snock, confused, asks what his pet has to do with any of this. The man reveals that the mole is the monster that caused the quake and buried his father alive. He adds that the creature even dared to get close to him and act like family, so Snock should hurry up and carry out justice with his own hands. Pushed past his limit, Snock awakens. Meanwhile, Syke is running outside the mine because the group he beat blew themselves up the moment he mentioned Noan, using a highly advanced trick that shows real skill with fire magic and enchanted tools. Syke can only think about one thing. Somehow all of this leads back to Noan. Now he needs to find out who's pulling the strings. Then someone walks up with an energy he knows right away. The protagonist instantly draws his sword. The one in front of him is Noan, using Snock's body. He demands to know what happened to the boy after the kidnapping. When nothing comes back, Zich realizes Snock isn't really aware of anything. He tries again and asks if Snock knows the name Noan. Still silent, the boy only clenches his teeth. A moment later, sharp stones burst up from the ground. Zich jumps back to avoid them, and finds it odd. He doesn't remember Noan acting like this before. Then he decides this isn't normal. Noan usually takes over people in a calm, planned way, not like someone losing his mind. Snock, now with flaming hair, notices an attack coming. MC is already above him, ready to strike, warning that if he wants to stay unharmed, he'd better start answering questions. The boy throws up an arm to protect himself. Blue light spreads out at once, and Snog blocks the blow, though the hit still smashes the ground and sends rocks flying. Snog fires back right away with a red beam, making Zich retreat before it can hit him. He realizes a normal person would have died from that first strike. The two lock eyes. Then more stone rises from the earth, and Zich feels Snog's power spike out of nowhere. That means he's close to awakening as the tyrant of the earth. The protagonist grips his sword again, and decides to finish this before Snog gets any stronger. Snog throws up a wall of stone to protect himself, but MC cuts right through it. As soon as he gets close, he slices through the final layer too. Snog suddenly fires off another attack, and the flash is so bright that Zich yells and shuts his eyes. Snog just watches him without any reaction. Out of nowhere, another sword clashes with his. It's the same hooded man, warning that the protagonist should value other people's lives, or killing without reason could drag him straight to hell. Zich backs off again, and asks if this was his doing. The man only smiles and asks if he didn't do it well. MC says the energy makes it obvious. The man fused Snog with a mythical earth beast, one he believes is called Noan. The enemy is thrown off that Zich knows the name and asks how. Scratching his neck, he says he can't give away all his secrets. Annoyed, the man gets ready to attack and asks if he's sure about that, because if the protagonist won't answer, he'll beat the truth out of him. Then it's revealed that the man used that same power on himself and turned into a beast. Now twice as big, he says he didn't want to show that form, but he had no choice. Without thinking, Snog rushes in to attack him, but the man catches him by the hair. He mocks Snog for thinking he's a threat. Then he throws the boy away and says his attention belongs somewhere else. Now, Zich cuts in and asks if tossing Snog aside like that is really smart. The beast replies that Snog must have done plenty to win MC over, but the boy's in berserk mode, and he can deal with him later. Right now, he is the target. The protagonist says he doesn't mind the time they're spending together. He dodges the next blow as it slams hard into the ground. The beast attacks again at once, but this time Zich answers back, stopping the man's punch with his sword. Laughing, the beast says that hit was weak, and nowhere near enough to beat him. Then a small blast suddenly goes off, blowing off the beast's arm and leaving him stunned. Zich doesn't waste the opening. He strikes again and finishes him for good. As he sheaths his sword, MC wonders how far Snog was thrown. Somewhere else, Hans runs through the forest, trying to find the source of the noise that sounded like an earthquake. Then he spots a small body on the ground, and quickly realizes it's Snog. Rushing over, Hans tells him to get up and show he's alive. Suddenly, Snog's eyes snap open. A little later, Hans is screaming, desperately asking why Snog is attacking him. As he tries to run, Hans can't think of a single reason he'd deserve this, and memories of meeting Snog for the first time flash through his mind. Seeing the boy lift a massive rock, Hans wonders what kind of training made that possible, and knows one hit will kill him. The possessed Snog hurls the boulder, and Hans instantly knows he can't dodge it in time. So he makes a fast choice. He'll cut the rock in half with his sword. To his surprise, it works, and he gets through untouched. Hand on his chest, Hans admits he really thought he was about to die. He also vows to show Snog what his training can do. Then another sound grabs his attention. When he turns, a giant wall is rising from the ground. Hans thinks this is it, but something saves him. Left confused, he can't tell where all that water came from. At the same time, Snog is about to be swallowed by a huge wave and blocks it with another stone wall. Then he looks up, eyes wide, and sees Zich diving down to attack. He believes this is the only way to stop Snog's rage. Snog begs him not to do it, but the protagonist presses a hand to Snog's forehead anyway, hoping the strike won't make things worse. Elsewhere, Snog wakes up, confused about where he is and what happened. Then a growl makes him look over. His mole is beside him, but now it's giving off the same evil energy that had been inside him. Snog reaches out to calm it, and begs Noshaun to hear him. He says his mind was controlled, and during that time he dreamed about Noshaun. He learned his father died in the earthquake caused by the mole, but he also knows it wasn't on purpose. It had only just been freed from its prison, and his father was there by chance. Tears in his eyes, Snog apologizes. He says he knows how painful it must have been when he walked away, and if he could turn back time, he'd do everything differently. Then he makes an offer. Snog holds out his hand again, and asks Noshaun to come out with him and live in the world together. Calmer now, the little mole reaches out and takes his finger, showing it's willing to make peace with him. By morning, people have gathered around the place where the fighting happened. Guards seal off the mine entrance and keep everyone away, while investigators search the inside. In a house farther away, Zeke asks if Hans followed his instructions. Hans says yes, he told everyone he knew nothing, and only went up the mountain because he heard a noise. Still worried, Hans asks if the knights might figure out the incident was their fault. MC says they scattered the bodies around the mine, so no one will suspect them. More than that, no one will ever believe a kid like Snog was involved. Sajit turns to Snog and says that now that he's made a pact with Noshaun, things should be okay, especially since their powers are so alike. Then he asks what Snog plans to do next. Snog says he's still thinking. Noshaun didn't truly mean to kill his father, and he can't ignore that. Ziggy understands and asks if Snog is struggling to forgive the mole because it faced no punishment. Then he suggests finding a way to make it repay that debt, which leaves Snog confused. Without going into detail, the protagonist reminds him that he wanted to be an adventurer so badly he got tricked for it, and says he can help with that. Call it his good deed. Nearby, birds start crying out as they sense movement, then suddenly fly far away. The warrior looks worn out, but he still keeps his weapon raised. With a fierce scream, he rushes in with everything he has. His opponent throws up a barrier to stop him, but the young man is so furious that one strike shatters the stone, leaving the boy and his pet stunned. Irritated, the young man asks if the boy is okay. Then someone walks over and asks what the two of them are doing. From his point of view, both were slacking off during the fight, so the imposing man declares they'll train for another hour. Exhausted, the boys can barely believe they have to do it all again. Later that night, they build a fire and roast meat. Sitting together, they dig in eagerly. Zumchuf just watches them in silence. One of the boys gets dramatic, going on and on about how good the food tastes. Curious, he asks where they're headed next, while holding a piece of meat. MC tells them they're going to Ospren. The boy beside him looks confused, clearly not knowing the place. Before the regression, there were 3 demons serving, and one of them came from Ospren. Zeke thinks over that demon's location and smiles, eager to find out more. His companions, though, look scared. Their master's face has turned terrifying. The next morning, the 3 set out early. Then Zeke spots dark smoke rising from the castle. The boys notice a strange smell too, definitely not food. When they learn it's the smell of burning bodies, they're horrified. He immediately wonders if this is only a fire or something worse, like an invasion. Not long after, a voice calls out from the forest. The knights leveled their spears and demanded the strangers say who they were. Hans and Snock got so tense they couldn't even answer. Zich stepped in and said they were only travelers, just passing through and looking for a safe place to spend the night. The guards whispered that they might have crossed the mountains and could be carrying sickness. The protagonist quietly tried to catch what they were saying. In the end, the guards told the 3 to come with them. It was a small village, locked down with armed guards everywhere. The 3 moved through it together, taking everything in. Before long, they were brought to the young lord's cabin and presented as suspicious outsiders. The boys stumbled as they were shoved inside. The guard calmly explained they found them in the forest, and they claimed to be travelers. He also made it clear they weren't believed to be from the village. The moment Zich saw the young master, his expression changed. The man smiled and introduced himself as Joachim Dracul, the commander of the force sent to this village. Joachim Dracul was one of the 4 people who once traveled the world with MC. For Zich, those days still felt strangely fresh, along with the memories of drinking together after their victories. Keeping his manners, he bowed and introduced himself as Zeke. He added that his companions were Hans and Snock, and the little one on his shoulder was Noan. Zeke said he came from Seoul to train his subordinates in the mountains. After hearing that, the 2 men traded curious looks. Joachim decided to trust them, which made the guard panic since he thought they might be fugitives. Joachim told him to relax and not jump to conclusions. He never planned to let the travelers leave right away anyway. Zeke couldn't help thinking about how naturally charismatic the man was. Now that they had entered the village, Joachim said they would need to stay with him for a while, because an infectious disease was spreading through the area. He had already figured that out from the clues around him. The soldiers had been sent there to stop the outbreak from spreading further. Since Zeke and the others had come into contact with them, they might be infected too, so they couldn't leave. Zeke calmly acted like he was weighing how serious that disease might be, expecting a longer talk, then smiled and offered to help Joachim Dracul. One boy looked stunned, while the other seemed pleased. Just then, a guard burst into the cabin, his voice shaking as he reported an infected person showing new symptoms. No one wasted time. They rushed out to see for themselves. When they got there, the shock on Joachim's face was obvious. One of his soldiers was on the ground, suffering violently. The order was simple: write down the symptoms and follow protocol. Watching from a short distance, Zeke noticed that response came from someone who had once served under him. Joachim touched his head, looking a little dizzy and pale. Sweat ran down his face as he admitted he was scared of blood. The protagonist had a hard time believing what he heard. Joachim gave a shaky laugh and said he had hemophobia. Before Zeke's regression, that same man had been known as the vampire. It made no sense. How could someone who controlled blood be afraid of it? Still, the Joachim of now was very different from the vampire MC once knew. To him, the whole thing felt so absurd it almost became funny. That fear clearly caused Joachim a lot of trouble, but he didn't seem willing to explain more. Dracul had always been secretive, and even before the regression, the only thing he ever shared was where he came from. Zeke sincerely told him Joachim would get through this. One day, he said, Joachim might get so used to blood, he could even bathe in it for fun. After that, since they couldn't leave, they stayed to help Joachim and his men. Together, they tried everything they could to wipe out the disease. But even then, the results weren't good enough, so they made the hard choice to burn the whole village down. As the flames spread, they could only watch in silence. Hans thought about all the people they had lost. Joachim had no choice but to accept the tragic end. Zeke could tell the young master was deeply shaken. So many deaths, and the total loss of the village, weighed heavily on him. The protagonist realized this wasn't how the Joachim from his old life would have reacted. In the end, Joachim thanked Zeke sincerely for all his help. Zeke answered that he was traveling to do good where he could. Joachim also thanked Hans and Snock for helping out. Smiling, he called all of them noble people. The report had been sent to the castle, and now they had to wait for orders. Joachim Dracul then invited his new friends to stay with him, and MC answered for everyone at once. They couldn't turn that down. A moment later, Sormei came running over, calling for his lord. He was carrying a message from the castle. Joachim opened the scroll and went still in shock. Zeke watched his face, trying to figure out what had changed. Soon Joachim told them to get ready to leave, but not for Osprin. Their next stop was another village, hit by the same disease. Hans and Snock were terrified when they heard that. Zeke realized Joachim was being sent to another infected place, even though he came from a noble family. Elsewhere, in a room inside a grand building, someone slammed a hand against an armrest with a loud crack. Seated there, the man thought over the report. The disease was highly contagious and could erase a whole village, so he couldn't understand why Joachim Dracul was still alive. The servant bowed and apologized, saying the young lord must simply be very lucky. That only made the man angrier, and he grabbed a vase beside him. He couldn't accept that the disease had failed to kill Joachim Dracul. In a rage, he hurled the vase into the wall. The servant calmly watched him lose control. Now the man wanted a new plan, one that would kill Joachim Dracul for good. Meanwhile, the soldiers built a huge bonfire. Hans realized all the bodies would be burned there. The fire filled the pit and kept spreading. In the end, this village too was wiped out by the disease. And once again, no order came to return to the castle. Then Zich heard an odd sound from deep in the forest. Hans looked uneasy and asked their leader about it. A second later, he drew his sword, ready for whatever came next. Firmly, he ordered whoever was hiding to come out at once. 5 hooded figures stepped from the trees and revealed themselves. They instantly pulled out the weapons hidden under their clothes and threw them at Zich without a word. He dodged the attack with sharp, precise movements and his sword in hand. Hans and Snock stared in shock. These were Black Hoods, skilled fighters who moved with purpose. Zich noted they seemed just like the ones from before. Knowing a fight had started, he called to Hans and Snock. His order was simple. Each boy should take one enemy. Then the protagonist charged in, leaving them stunned. He wanted to capture one alive and force out as much information as possible, so he leaped toward his target, then noticed something off. A huge explosion burst through the forest and cut off his approach. Right away he recognized it as the same artifact used by the warrior from Seoul. Even the fighting style looked the same. That made him wonder why they were all gathered here. As the battle grew fiercer, his thoughts kept racing. Back in Seoul, their goal had been to turn Noam into a demon. This time, it might be something similar. That meant the Black Hoods were likely after Johan Dracul, the man who would one day become his companion. Zich suspected Johan becoming a demonic human was tied to all this. It was around this time that demonic humans first began appearing in the world, enough for people to call it the era of demonic humans. Deep down, MC started to wonder if these people had created them all. Then he remembered some changed naturally, like he had. That led him to a more troubling thought. Maybe his own rise as the Demon King had been part of someone's plan. After leaving the Count's estate, every event seemed to push him toward that fate. From the start, everything had driven him toward becoming a demonic human. Back then, he thought it was only bad luck and a broken world. While he was thinking, one enemy prepared a flame spell aimed at him. Anger rose in Zich at the idea that he might have been used like a puppet. He sprang into the air and rushed straight at his opponent. Whatever the truth was, he had no intention of forgiving any of them. Later that night, back at camp, Hans, Snock, and Noam were fast asleep. Zich stayed awake, bothered that he hadn't captured a single one of those fighters. In the end, every one of them had killed themselves. Staring into the fire, he thought about Johan becoming a demonic human. If so, Johan might be standing in the Black Hood's way right now. By himself, he wondered what kind of person Johan would become if that happened. In the end, he decided Johan was better off staying human. Then Johan came over, and noticed Zich was still awake. The two sat by the fire in the quiet night. Zich kept thinking about what could possibly make Johan become a demonic human. For someone with hemophobia, gaining blood control must have taken something impossible to resist. When he looked at Johan, he noticed the young lord seemed far away. Dracul admitted he had been thinking about his father. Earlier that year, his father had collapsed and never truly woke up again. That was why Johan had been wondering if he should have done things differently. Right then, the warrior understands why Johan's hands held so much power. As the oldest son, that role should have been his by default. Even so, Zich stayed wary and kept a close eye on him. Then a soldier rushes into camp in a panic. After catching his breath, he says they've been ordered back to the castle. Johan Dracul can barely believe what he's hearing. By then, night had fully fallen over the place. Soft footsteps echoed as people moved through the halls. Johan Dracul greets his brother and shows that he's safe. His brother welcomes him home, but the look in his eyes is clearly fake. Zich quietly studies the difference between the two brothers. The only thing they really share is how unhealthy they look. One unstable, the other pale and frail. Then he turns his attention to the old butler beside them. Dracul tells his brother, the sickness has spread through Osprin. Instead of concern, the man blames Johan for failing to keep the outbreak under control. Even the soldiers can't believe they're being pinned with all the blame. Still, His brother gives him another order: go back to Osprin and contain the disease again. This time he's not allowed to return until the plague is gone. The man adds that he could catch it too, and says the thought alone makes him sick. The young master has no answer for that. In the end, he just accepts the mission. Back in Osprin, they carefully look over the situation. The infected area is under heavy quarantine. So far, 60 people have died. The doctor says the disease may be Igrum, and Zik notices each city seems to be dealing with a different sickness. That makes him wonder who's really behind all of this. Fest, the demonic human, could throw the whole world into panic with a disease outbreak. But spreading some ordinary plague doesn't seem like Fest's style. Even so, Zik starts piecing together a possible plan. If Fest is hiding in the city, he needs to force him into the open. And with the death toll still lower here, he might have a chance. The problem is, the doctors still have no cure. Even with all their work, making a treatment has been nearly impossible. Then the protagonist tells the young master he may be able to make a cure for Igrum. Soon after, they head to see the patients. Zik brings a potion that might treat the disease. Before his regression, when epidemics spread across the world, scholars and researchers had already developed a cure for Igrum. Back then, MC learned how to make it because Joheim was interested in diseases. Holding the medicine, he checks one of the patients. Then he calmly pours some of it into the man's mouth. Everyone waits nervously for what happens next. A moment later, the patient wakes up and begs for water. Once the cure proves it works, Zik says he'll write the formula down for the doctors. Joheim asks if he's really willing to share something that could make him rich. Joheim can't understand why he'd give away a cure worth a fortune. He simply says he doesn't care about money, he just wants to help people. Then Dracul walks over to him. The young master thanks Zik with a warm hug. Smiling, he says meeting him was the best thing that ever happened to him. The protagonist, though, doesn't seem too happy about the hug. The formula is spread to the rest of the patients, and they quickly start getting better. MC also teaches the doctors the best way to make the medicine. Now that a cure for Igrum exists, Fest showing up feels like a matter of time. Then someone starts frantically calling for Zych. The butler arrives with soldiers around him. He has no idea why all this is happening. The butler asks where he learned to make the cure. That question makes Zych remember the intimidating man who always stayed at Joheim's brother's side. The more he thinks about it, the more he suspects the old man might be Fest. Not long after, the two are seated across from each other at a table. Once again, the man demands to know where the protagonist learned the Igrum treatment. MC repeats that he found it in a book. The butler doesn't buy it, and he clearly dislikes his answer. He slams the table and rises, trying to pressure him. But Zych can't give the book's name. He only adds that it mentioned a cure for just one disease, Igrum. The old man's eyes fill with anger, and his patient starts wearing thin. Then Dracul walks in and catches him cornering Zych. He immediately asks what the butler thinks he's doing. Annoyed, he says the man is being rude to Osprin's savior. With no answers to show for it, the butler turns and leaves. Joheim apologizes, saying the man went too far. After recalling that face from the castle, the protagonist asks who he really is. In every memory, the man was always beside the young master's brother. Dracul explains that he's Bethnal Salome, the family's butler. He used to lead the knights, but after an injury forced him to retire, he became the household butler. His reaction may be because Zych's cure could raise his standing above both brothers. Salome is backing Joheim's brother as the next successor. Because of the interruption, MC still can't tell if Salome is really Fest. Changing topics, Joheim says he heard he doesn't have enough people to make more medicine, so he's ready to introduce someone who wants to help. After being called in, a lady enters the tent. Greta Varget, head of the Varget company, seems pleased to meet him. Her mourning clothes stand out, and Zio doesn't understand why she's wearing them. Miss Varget has long funded research on infectious disease, and she asks if she can learn the cure formula. Seeing how much she already knows, the protagonist says he's the one who might learn more from her. They move to another area where soldiers are hauling heavy crates. There, Zed explains the basics of the medicine and what they know about Igrum. First, they need to cut off the water sources and keep producing the cure. Watching from a distance, his subordinates notice the two getting along and trading a few compliments. Hans jokes they look like a couple, and Snock agrees. As sunset draws near, the mood around them shifts. An herb is shown, and Zeech explains it's good for treating a cold. Greta Vargat is thrilled by everything he's teaching her. Even then, she feels there's still far more she can learn from him. She explains that her interest in herbs and medicine came from her family. Still, her family never actually researched diseases. After hesitating for a while, she finally works up the courage to make a request. Vargat asks Zeech to come with her and meet her family. Darkness settles over the area, leaving everything around the castle in shadow. A man quietly opens a door. He's entered the noble's private chamber. There, a potion is poured into the mouth of Joheim's unconscious father. At once his expression begins to shift, and his hands clutch the bed sheets. Holding the bottle, Bethnal Salome says this is only the sovereign's. Zeech grows confused when he realizes they're standing in front of graves. Greta reveals that every member of her family died from a terrible infectious disease. That's why she started studying it, to stop others from losing their families the way she did. Because of that vow, she began wearing mourning clothes. She says she'll only take them off when infectious diseases are wiped from the world. That's also why she brought Zeech to the graves of her husband and son. After sharing that much, she decides it's time to head back. Together, she says, they'll erase Igram from the world. With that, she turns and walks away from the cemetery. But MC still doubts her and wonders if she could be Fest too. Meanwhile, his subordinates are puzzled about something. Zeech notices they're staring at him. Busy as he is, he tells them to quit wasting time and say what's on their minds. To his surprise, Hans asks about his relationship with Miss Vargat. Apparently, the soldiers have been spreading rumors that the two are a couple. Zeech neither confirms it nor denies it. Hans then says his boss is a man after all, not some kind of Buddha. Hearing that, he throws a rock at his head. The protagonist can't understand why people think he and Greta Vargat are involved, when nothing romantic has happened. On top of that, she showed up right after he made the Igram cure, and knows a lot about disease. That's why he still suspects she might be Fishy-Enters, making her even more suspicious than Salome. Still, she hasn't acted like a demon yet, so he decides to watch her a little longer. He then thinks he should have asked Glenn, since Glenn was the only one who knew Fishy-Alf's identity after killing him. While he's lost in thought, someone calls out to him. The news is that the Lord's men have taken Miss Vargat. Joheim says they claimed it was to check the Lord's condition, but he wants to confirm that himself. Zeech quickly realizes the one person crucial to treating the disease has been taken. His thoughts circle back to Salome, possibly being Fest and still being inside the castle. Determined, MC offers to go with the young master, but Dracul tells him to remain in Osprin. This is a family matter, and besides, no one else is qualified to care for so many patients. Even so, the young master promises he'll bring Greta Vargat back safely. Respecting that choice, Zeech says he'll wait for him. The two seal it with a handshake. Elsewhere, the butler reads a paper packed with long writing. Then a soldier arrives and says young Master Bjorn wants to see butler Salome. With a smile, he says he won't be able to join the noble that night. A few days later, someone shows Lord Zeech the last building still standing. They've been searching that haunted place for the missing villagers. Gathering their courage, he and his men face the grim scene inside. The report gets worse. A nearby region now has a disease with the same symptoms. Because of his medical knowledge, the protagonist is the best person to go there and see it for himself. He accepts the order and prepares to leave, but he still had no proof that Joheim had reached the castle. A soldier quickly assures him Joheim was already settled in and tells him to focus on the village. As he opens the door, Zeech thinks about how long it has been since Dracul left. He also feels that if he ignores those orders, the young master could end up in danger. The doors swing open, drawing everyone's attention. Then the boys' faces change when they spot something off. People were lying on the floor with sheets over their heads. A strange voice suddenly asks who had come in. A man carrying a bucket warns them they weren't allowed inside. Zeech tells him they're from Osborne and came to check the sickness. The man smiles, assumes they're doctors, and quickly apologizes. Sensing this wasn't the place to talk, he offers to take them somewhere quieter. Hans and Snock agree to go with him. As they move, Zeech says he already understands what's going on. A moment later, he tightens his grip on his weapon, startling the man. Then MC points his sword right at him. The man's face twists into something much darker. He pulls out a weapon and gets into position. Without hesitating, he rushes straight at him. But Zeech is faster and cuts him down with one clean strike. The blade goes through him and the attacker drops dead. Snock is left staring, completely confused. Before saying anything, the protagonist pulls his sword back out. Then a huge blast erupts, throwing debris everywhere. When the smoke clears, Bethnal Salam steps out, ready to fight. Still, Zeech wasn't foolish enough to walk into an obvious trap. The three get ready for battle, and on MC's command, Hans and Snock fight side by side. Even with his smug attitude, Salam admits the young man is sharper than he looks. The old man then orders his men to kill them all. The three of them start cutting through the soldiers charging in. While fighting, Zeech studies the situation. Then he realizes those attackers are actually villagers. From how they looked and moved, they were most likely infected. In the end, the civilians were being used as human shields. Salam's methods felt a lot like Fest's. Calling out to his allies, Zeech tells them to spare anyone who isn't a real killer. Even so, Snock looks confused by that order. Then he turns and catches part of the fight. Hans brutally twists one man's arm, even though they were supposed to only knock them out. They couldn't kill innocent people, but they also had no time to be careful. Meanwhile, the attacks keep coming, and the pressure keeps rising. By now, Salam should have known he was losing. Zeech and the others keep taking the men down as fast as they can. Seeing the tide turn, Salam desperately calls for Karobot. A giant bursts in, carrying a massive weapon. The boys freeze for a second at the sight of it. There was no time to talk. Karobot roars and prepares to attack. Zeech had never met Fifth himself, but he remembered that monster well. It was one of Fifth's servants. That made him even more sure Salam was tied to Festing. And even for someone as skilled as him, Karobot would be a serious problem. For one brief moment, everything goes still. Then a door gets smashed apart. Zeech's fight with Karobot keeps growing more intense. Creatures like that were the worst to face because of their overwhelming strength. Salam watches with a grin, clearly pleased by the monster's power. But the protagonist's sword skill is on another level. and he moves in to strike. Crobot suddenly grabs the blade and swings at him. Zik barely avoids the hit. Using that opening, he seizes his weapon and launches himself forward. Even when he lands a hit, he realizes the monster's skin is absurdly tough. At the same time, the boys keep fighting hard just to stay alive. That's when MC knows he'll have to push even further. He still had more mana left, but not enough to bring this thing down by brute force. So he decides to use expansion sense with what he has left. Mana hums through his sword and spreads across the room. Now he only needs the perfect opening. Crobot keeps hammering him with non-stop attacks. Then Zix notices the monster drop to one knee. He lifts his sword high. In that instant, he knows this is the chance he was waiting for. His blade drives straight into Crobot's stomach. The monster jerks in agony as pain tears through its body. Mana pours from the sword and triggers several spells at once. Salim hates what he's seeing and grows even more furious. Then things turn truly desperate as a wave of mana swirls through the area. The vortex drags in everything nearby, even the butler. Crobot realizes too late that there's no way out. The monster is swallowed by the force and explodes, while Salim watches in horror. Even weaker than before, Zik could still unleash terrifying destruction. Soon after, he walks up to Salim and asks if he was behind the spreading diseases. The Black Hoods used the same weapons as the men who once tried to kidnap Snock and Nawem. With a smug grin, the villain says he has no interest in making deals. He only wants him destroyed. Zix can't make sense of what the man's real goal is. Out of control with rage, Salim vows revenge for the way his plans against the Dracul family were ruined. Hans and Snock watch the exchange in nervous silence. Then the butler pulls a vial from his clothes, making his plan clear. He smashes it on the ground without hesitation. Hans and Snock tense up, wondering if it's poison, but Zix tells them it's only a smoke bomb, and now they need to chase the old man before he escapes. After that, they would head for the castle and help Joheim. Locked in a cell and bound in chains, the young master had no way out. They needed to reach the Lord's castle immediately. Zik knew Joheim could already be in danger. Then his eyes fall on one of the collapsed civilians nearby. There was a red mark behind the man's ear. Meanwhile, down in the castle dungeon, Joheim had been thrown into prison by his own brother Jorn, who had seized the castle. Even then, he still worries about Miss Varga and hopes she's safe. A voice suddenly speaks to him. Dracula is shocked that someone managed to enter a prison meant only for criminals. The man smiles and says he came to help. Then he shows him a fiery orb called the Bloody Vessel and tells Joheim to put it inside his body. With it, he could gain enormous power, enough to kill the brother who wanted him dead, along with all his followers. The man is caught off guard when the young master flatly refuses. Xiaobei didn't trust something handed to him by a stranger. Annoyed, the hooded man realizes this isn't going the way he planned. Maybe it was because of that bastard who showed up with the cure for Egram. So he changes tactics and says he'll tell him the truth instead. There was a man who could control infectious diseases, however he wanted. And that man had joined forces with Xiaobei's brother, to have him killed. That finally makes Dracul listen more closely. Bjorn wiped out nearby villages with disease just to kill him, and spread Egram through Austrin's weakest people. But Xiaobei survived it all, so they locked him away. Seeing his anger build, the man claims he only sided with Bjorn for a time. He says he can't let the brother become the next count, because Austrin would turn into hell. That's why Xiaobei should stop hesitating and take the chance to save everyone. Once again, the hooded man offers him that great power. If he really wants to protect people, he says, he should absorb the bloody vessel. Just then, Zich steps into the cell. Almost casually, he asks if the item is for sale. The man quickly hides it up his sleeve. As the protagonist comes closer, he demands to know what that thing is. Even when the man refuses, Zich keeps pushing, saying the least he deserves is an answer after being ambushed so many times. The hooded man still refuses and says MC was never supposed to know. The two lock eyes in the middle of the prison. He says dealing with this guy is no fun at all. Ever since seeing one of his allies back in Seoul, he's had a theory. He believes they're all part of an organization making demonic humans. So his guess is simple. The plan was to turn Xiaobei into one of those monsters. That accusation only makes the man more irritated. At this point, all he could do was hold out until help arrived. Getting useful answers from him would be hard anyway, since he barely talked. Then noise starts rising from outside the prison. It sounds like Jorn's reinforcements have arrived, but it's actually Hans and several soldiers coming to help the young master. The hooded man grows even angrier when he learns they've taken control of the whole area. Zyke starts mocking him, saying his face looks different now. With a smile, he asks if that short burst of hope felt nice. Knowing he's cornered, the man turns and runs. The protagonist calls out to Snock, who immediately uses his power. Stones crash from the ceiling, shaking the prison. The man panics, realizing he's finished. A massive explosion follows, blasting debris everywhere. As the smoke clears, the soldiers look around to see what happened. One of them suddenly warns the young master about danger incoming. A huge stone hand rises from the ground, but Xiaobei is safe inside it, completely protected. Zeech praises Snock for pulling that off. Despite everything, the noble had made it through without a scratch. Now the next goal was clear: bring down his brother for starting this whole war. Still, MC has his doubts about a few things. Soon after, they move through the halls at a steady pace. The young master leads the soldiers toward Jorn's room, but Zeech notices the way he speaks to the soldiers is very different from the Dracul he knew in his past life. If not for his weak body, Joheim would have become heir long ago. Then they all stop when they spot the butler. Annoyed, Joheim calls out to Salam, unable to make sense of what he's seeing. A moment later, he spots Jorn's body on the floor. Seeing Zeech there, Salam assumes his underling failed. Somehow the young man survived and saved Joheim again. Joheim steps forward and asks if Salam was behind all these disasters. The butler just smiles, almost impressed they finally figured it out. He also admits he was the one who left the Lord in that state to pass judgment on the Dracul family. Joheim is thrown off and can't understand why. Angry now, he demands to know what happened to Miss Varget, but Zeech cuts in. Salam wasn't the true mastermind. Fest was the one spreading the disease. Then everyone hears a woman's footsteps coming closer. With a smile, Greta Varget says she's surprised he is still alive. That makes everything click for the others. In the end, Miss Varget was the one who spread the plague. Salam had been helping her the whole time. Joheim can hardly believe it, and asks why she did it. Salam, furious, raises his sword and snaps at everyone to be quiet. He angrily asks if Dracul knew about the crimes his father committed. Then Salam starts recalling what happened 10 years ago. When sickness spread through Osprey, his father did everything he could to stop it. It helped for a while, but those efforts left him buried in debt. Then the Lord chose to spread the disease again through the areas where his lenders lived. Joheim is stunned and questions whether Salam is telling the truth. The people who trusted his father and loaned him money died from the outbreak. That included the head of the Varget company, Salam's only friend. So he swore revenge on the whole Dracul family, using his dead friend's sword. Zeech tells him that kind of revenge is monstrous, because innocent people are suffering. Salam dismisses them as fools who worship the Dracul family to the very end. To him, Joheim was no better than the Lord. Gripping his sword, Salam points it at them. Zeech's words only make him madder, and he rushes straight at the boy. Joheim tenses, worried for his friend, but the protagonist is already ready for him. Then something no one expected happens. Varget appears behind Salam and slams him with a brutal strike. He stares in shock, unable to believe she betrayed him. As Salam drops, the woman coldly says he had it all wrong. This was never really about revenge. Greta Varget wanted as many people sick as possible. Zeech asks if she had some reason beyond revenge. Seeing Salam is dead, she lets his body fall. Varget says she learned the truth after disease killed her whole family. Her husband and son were healthy the day before, then suddenly burned with fever and vomited blood. Even the doctors stayed away, scared of catching it, so she cared for them alone. Hour after hour, day after day, she watched their faces slowly lose all life. Then she had a twisted realization. To her, people dying of disease looked beautiful, and she thanked Count Dracul for showing her that. Curious, one soldier can't take another word from her. Waiting for Jotheim's order, he wants to kill the woman who caused his comrades' deaths. Even then, Greta shows no fear. She stayed close to them for one special reason. The plague in Osprey wasn't limited to a small group. Jotheim realizes she has more hostages, and she seems pleased they're smart enough to catch on. Wanting the full truth, he asks who she means. Her expression shifts as she drops a shocking answer. Everyone is horrified to learn she may have infected all of Osprey. Jotheim can't believe she spread it to the entire city. The danger keeps growing. Then she suddenly steers the talk another way. Zeech makes it clear he's ready to end this now. Greta smiles, thinking the boy is easy to push around. Instead, MC says he believes every word she said. Greta asks if that means he'd sacrifice all of Osprey just to stop her. If that's the choice, Zeech says he'll kill her right here. Hans panics, thinking his leader should choose the people instead. But he doesn't budge. He still plans to finish her. Hans looks devastated at the thought that everyone in Osprey might die. He's even more shaken when the protagonist calls it a necessary sacrifice. Knowing Hans wants to be a storybook hero, MC reminds him real choices hurt. If they let her flee into the mountains, she'd spread even more disease. In the end, far more people would die than all of Osprey. Zeech says he's only trying not to hide behind talk of which choice feels nicer. With his sword leveled at her, he waits for her move. Greta sees the fight is about to begin. He meets it with a grin, ready for the clash. Suddenly Jotheim grabs his arm and says they can't give up everyone in Osprey. Calmly Zeech says the people will be fine, but if it came down to Osprey or Lady Varget, there was never a choice. More confused than ever, Jotheim presses him to explain. Greta Varget is stunned when the protagonist reveals the whole city has already been treated. Smiling, he mocks that tiny bit of hope she just had. Varget can't believe it and assumes he's lying. Zeech explains that people infected by her disease had a red mark behind the ear, so he guessed it was Galdur. After seeing the controlled people in Osprey village, he connected the clues, and on the way to the castle, he became sure. Along the road, he ran into a young man. Watching him closely, Zeech figured it out. The people of Osprey had the same red mark behind the ear, so he treated them before he ever reached the castle. Varget still can't understand how he managed all that alone. The cure should have needed Vio Kowal, and those are too rare to make enough for the whole city. Zeit shrugs and says he knows nothing about Viocoal, so he used holcomb instead, the purple herb that grows all along the roads. So curing Osprin wasn't hard at all. The medicine was simple to make. Greta is left speechless that her disease could be cured by a roadside plant. MC twists the knife, saying she wasn't very skilled after all. That smug jab makes her angrier by the second. Trying to recover, she shifts to his so-called treatment. She still doesn't get how he cured the whole city in half a day. Zeit says she was the one who gave him the clue. The cure worked as a liquid, and it barely had any taste. She remembers telling him that igram spread through the water. So he poured the cure into the water lines. He only told a small number of people about the disease. Before heading to the Lord's castle, he confirmed the treated people had lost the red mark. After that, they mixed the medicine into the pipelines. Even with all that, he admits he can't promise every last person was cured. Still, he'd gladly take that chance if it means stopping her. Varga never expected this boy to wreck her plans. Calmly, she pulls out a vial from her dress. She didn't want to use it, but now she sees no other option. The vial shatters, and the liquid spills over her hands. Zeit watches her closely as she changes. In seconds, her face looks completely different, and even her eyes change color. Greta Varga is actually a powerful witch. She unleashes her magic, trying to overwhelm everyone at once. Joheim orders his men to capture the witch immediately, but she's too strong, countering every attack with spells. She quickly lands a hit on one soldier. He drops to his knees and touches his face, sensing something wrong. Soon red spots will spread across it, and then he'll start vomiting blood. Zeit realizes anyone touched by the witch's blood gets infected. He immediately orders the soldiers and everyone in the castle to evacuate. Joheim freezes for a moment, thinking of her father and brother. Then she firmly orders the retreat and warns the knights not to touch the witch's blood. The rest she leaves to Zeit. Varga gets ready for the final fight, almost excited to face him. As he weaves through her spells, the protagonist thinks a mage would be perfect for this battle. Then the witch admits that, annoying as he is, he was a good escort. With a mocking smile, she says she'll return the favor by making this more entertaining. MC can tell she'll do anything to win. Sword in hand, he reveals the skill he's counting on. If Varga's blood touches him, he'll be infected at once. And if he cuts her carelessly, the splashing blood could hit him. That's what makes her such a pain to fight. So he decides to target the places that still haven't fully healed. Leaping in, he strikes the witch's arm, leaving a burning wound. A second later, her arm drops to the floor. Zichi smiles, clearly pleased with the opening he made. Varga is baffled that her body isn't regenerating, but she still refuses to lose and prepares to attack him with her magic again. Greta takes off running. She refuses to die here. Zichi chases after her at once, ready to give it everything he has. He couldn't let her escape the Lord's land. The old Demon King version of the protagonist would laugh at how hard he's trying to protect the townspeople now. Greta runs in panic, but MC stays right behind her the whole time. She finally stops in the forest, completely worn out. Then it hits her. She's trapped and out of options. Behind her, Zich is already lining up another strike. With no way out, Greta tries to talk her way free. He has nothing to say to someone like her. He drives his sword straight into her. Her body bursts into flames as he watches. Greta Varga dies right there. When he turns around, Zichi sees someone silently watching. A hood hides the woman's face, making her hard to read. By the time Greta is reduced to ash, the protagonist is already wondering who this girl is. Maybe a mage from the Dracul family. She pulls back her hood. Zichi's struck by how beautiful she is. Then she calls him by a name he shouldn't know. MC Steelwill. That leaves him completely confused. He searches his memory, but he's sure he's never seen her before. The girl pauses and decides the man before her isn't him. Steelwill. In an instant, the mood turns tense. Then her expression changes again, like she's decided he really is Zich, Steelwill. The protagonist rushes her with his sword, but he's stopped by a magic barrier. The sorceress blasts him back with her power. Zich can't understand how she knows his Demon King name, when that name shouldn't exist here. He demands to know how she learned it, but she says nothing. Seeing she won't answer, he switches tactics and casually asks her out. Honestly, he is interested in that pretty face. Instead of replying, the woman starts casting again. As magic gathers, she mocks him. What a weird way to ask someone to dinner. Zich dodges as he realizes her spells are both fast and strong. She keeps chanting complex spell names without stopping. He figures she's using shortcuts to cast faster. After a quick thought, he realizes she can put up barriers almost instantly. The moment he slips, a painful hit slams into his leg. Now he knows for sure, he's fighting a top-class sorceress. Meanwhile, she gathers her magic for something much bigger. Soon she rises into the air inside her barrier. Zich changes approach and moves in more carefully. Then he jumps high, ready to cut her down. Even crouched, she keeps chanting her strongest spells. A stone wall suddenly rises and blocks his attack. That tells him she's used to real combat. Her eyes carry both anger and warning. The stone keeps growing until it slams into Zich hard. Flames wrap around her body. She clearly means to kill him. A fireball shoots straight at MC. Knowing how dangerous it is, he throws his sword into the flames. The blade cuts right through the fireball. The blast that follows rocks the forest and shatters Zich's sword. Now unarmed, he'll have to rely on his body. He charges the fireball again and punches into it. The hit is so strong it sends the spell back at her. Even inside her barrier, the shattered pieces still hit her. Touching her body, she realizes that attack wasn't enough. The sorceress gets more annoyed, and Zeech clearly enjoys seeing it. Even hurt, she tries to launch another spell. His face hardens when he sees what's coming. A massive sharp ice crystal is aimed right at him. He smashes it apart with one punch, blowing it into countless pieces. A skilled battle mage would keep pressure on an enemy non-stop. That's why her strange pauses bother him. He's dealt with rough limits himself since his regression. His body just couldn't fully keep up with all his old combat experience. Zeech knows her technique is far too polished for someone her age, and she also knows his old name. Putting those clues together, he starts to see it more clearly. Maybe the girl is a regressor too. That guess fits, though some of her movements still feel off. On top of that, she doesn't seem used to pain at all. That doesn't match someone with this level of fighting skill. For a fighter, that lack of pain tolerance is especially strange. He can't explain it perfectly, but his guess is that the experience in her body was put there by force. Then Zeech hears someone call his name and looks over. Hans is worried when he sees the protagonist injured, but MC brushes it off and tells him to stay back. One of the soldiers points deeper into the forest. Hans asks if Zeech managed to finish off Varga, but he knows that wasn't his doing. The stranger burned Varga's body away with a single attack. A confused soldier still raises his sword at the possible enemy, but the protagonist thinks back to how the fight began and explains that he attacked first. After thinking it over, he sees no real reason to fight her, except that she knew the name Zeech more, and in the end, she took care of Greta for them. So MC apologizes for how he acted. Now he just wants to know who she is. The woman asks if all those men are his subordinates. He says no, they're allies working with him. She doesn't seem to understand that word and looks curious. Zeech simply repeats himself. Then he thanks her for killing Greta Varga, the one behind the village's tragedies. The mage can barely believe what she's hearing. He is puzzled by her reaction. She seems most shocked that Zeech actually cares about the people in the village. That wasn't something the great demon king would ever do. Meanwhile, the protagonist keeps wondering if she truly knew him from before his regression. After all, Demon King the 1100th Moor no longer exists in this time. They stare at each other in silence. Then a soldier gets upset by the way she talks to Osprun's hero. She grows even more confused. She can't believe this man is called a hero. The soldier firmly says Zeech has done a lot for the village. Then the woman asks for his surname. Without knowing how much she already understands, he tells her image of him is wrong. After hearing that, she starts noticing more things that don't add up. Zeech is losing patience and starts to see she has no plan to tell him who she is. If she stays silent, she'll have to be treated as an intruder. She presses a gemstone to her chest. Power floods the forest, forcing the men to cover their eyes. The protagonist realizes the necklace she's wearing is an artifact. The light around her grows brighter, and disappointment shows on her face. A moment later, she vanishes completely. Teleportation is rare. Magic only great mages can use. That just makes Zeech even more curious about her identity. Morning comes at the Grey Tower. Hans mourns his family and wonders if his father and brother reached heaven. MC answers that they'll have to face the weight of their sins, and he believes they were ready for that, hard as it may be. Hans thanks Zeech for arranging the funeral. He also feels bad that they couldn't send people after the sorceress, but he knows chasing someone with a teleportation artifact would be pointless. Besides, since she knows things about his past, this has become personal. They say their goodbyes. Since Zeech is leaving with Hans and Snock, Hans awkwardly asks if the protagonist would stay and work for them, with full support. MC turns the offer down. He's sure the new count will take good care of the city. Still, everyone knows he was the real one who saved Osprun. Hans also couldn't handle all the blood and passed out after the fighting ended. He still thinks his hemophobia is embarrassing for the ruler of Draculand. Seeing his worry, Zeech pulls something from his bag, and Hans immediately tenses up. It turns out to be the bloody vessel he was offered back in the prison. Hans nervously recognizes the same artifact from the cell. After the battle, Zeech had recovered it from the dirt. He explains that hemophobia could become a serious problem for a lord, so Hans should try using it. The protagonist hands over the orb and says it will let Hans control nearby blood, but if he pushes that power too far, it could go badly. Hans asks if there's any way to stop the craving for other people's blood. MC answers bluntly, if Hans ever turns evil, he'll come back and kill him. Night falls over the lit castle. Inside an office, someone is buried in work. A sound comes from the door, and he tells the person to come in. Carrying a stack of papers, a soldier says these are the extra documents. Though exhausted, he realizes it's going to be a very long night. After receiving the bloody vessel, the Lord seems much calmer and healthier. Zeech asks how things are going with blood. For now, everything is under control, as long as he doesn't try to manipulate someone else's blood. Seeing that power at work, his subordinate watches with clear interest. After getting the artifact, the Count started training with it so he could protect himself. Even then, the soldiers still wondered how Zeech knew so much. Still, they didn't need to know why he did it or who he really was. He saved the city, and that was enough. Then the Count rose from his seat and said there was something he wanted to look into more. he was especially curious about the sorceress and the black-robed group, and planned to investigate them. At the same time, the three travelers rested quietly in the forest. He lay there deep in thought, trying to figure out who that woman really was. She somehow knew he had once been Zik Moore before his regression. On top of that, her power felt close to the demon of sorceries. That was one of the demon kings who once stood beside the protagonist and helped spread terror across the world. They had clashed before, so MC knew that demon could use every kind of spell with ease. But that demon king was an old man. That's why Zik still couldn't place the stranger, and he was sure he'd remember a face like hers. If she had regressed too, then how was she tied to the key that twists destiny? She might even be the one who planted that item inside him. Still, that was only a guess. Even so, he couldn't stop thinking about her face or those strange expressions. He also couldn't figure out how she had been watching him until Hans called out and pulled him from his thoughts. Hans looked uneasy, wondering whether killing Lady Varget should have come before saving Osprey. Zix understood exactly what was bothering him. Some sacrifices were hard to accept, even when there was a reason for them. So the protagonist challenged him with one question: did Hans want to be a hero or a god? He went on to say that putting off hard choices only makes things worse. Then Hans asked if Zik thought he could really become a hero. MC didn't give him a clear answer. He told Hans to trust his own heart. Now that Hans was following him, he would guide him and help him however he could. While they talked, Snock and Nawam were fast asleep. The protagonist kept advising Hans, telling him he needed to keep growing stronger. In the end, there was only one answer: train hard and do your best every time. The next morning, the sun rose over the mountains. A pack of starving wolves found the three travelers and got ready to strike. Snock watched them carefully and waited for the right opening. As the wolves closed in, he began casting. A moment later, his magic dropped one of them. The effort showed on his face right away. But even then, there were still wolves left, hungry and ready to attack. Then a sound came from the other side. Hans charged in and cut into the pack with his sword. Once the fight was over, Zichy stepped closer to check on his companions. The beasts had been taken down by the two boys' own skill. Hans wondered why there were so many monsters in that forest. Snock added that there was a village nearby. Zich was already thinking the same thing. The number of monsters was too high to ignore. Soon after, someone called out to them. An old man carrying a sharp spear approached, clearly tense around the stranger's strength. He cautiously asked if they could lend him a hand. According to him, orcs were hiding in those mountains, and he wanted their help dealing with them. Zich considered that those creatures might be the reason the forest had become so dangerous. Together, they examined a huge footprint in the dirt. Snock even showed the trail to his pet and pointed out where the orc might have gone. Hans asked if they might be up against a whole tribe. MC said he couldn't know yet. They'd have to look deeper first. Snock asked if his master could really track them from one footprint. Truth was, Zich wasn't great at tracking, so they'd have to go with a simpler method. His plan was basic: walk, watch, listen, and feel. That was when his companions realized he didn't really have a real plan. Even so, Zich knew enough about tracking to get by. His senses covered a wide area, and with Hans and Snock moving fast, he figured they'd find the orcs within a few days. Then he sensed something coming toward them. At first he thought it might be an undead. Hans and Snock tensed up, only to find a skinny child wandering alone in the forest. The boy looked starved and completely lost. Since he could barely stay on his feet, they offered him a piece of bread. The moment he saw the food, his eyes locked onto it. Smiling, Zich held out the bread and told him it was really good. They kept searching, then spent the night at an inn in the nearby town. A few days later, they finally found the orcs on their own ground. Beating them was easy work. Afterward, Zich refused any payment from the old man. The village chief called them saviors and treated them to a nice meal. The boy from the mountains flinched whenever anyone got near him. He clearly didn't trust the people around him. The protagonist gave him another piece of bread, and the boy was deeply thankful. In the end, the child tried to repay that kindness, but said he hadn't come just for food. His mother had warned him not to take things from strangers, but Zich didn't seem like a bad man, so he asked if MC really was a good person. The answer startled him when he said no. With a grin, the protagonist explained that he was a bad person trying to do good things. As night came, the boy happily ate the bread. He was so hungry he scarfed it down, and Zich handed him some water too. When MC pulled out a handkerchief, he noticed the child was saving the rest for relatives who worked hard all day. He asked if those people thought getting food like that was strange. The boy said his family never questioned it. Everyone in town already knew Zich was the man who beat the orcs in the forest. The praise quickly boosted the protagonist's mood, and he told the boy that next time he didn't need to linger outside like a thief. The child worried people would insult someone like him for entering a nicer place, but MC had already spoken to everyone about him. That kindness left the boy confused, since most people treated him with hate. It reminded him of something Timmy once said. Long ago, someone had helped them without wanting anything back. Zeke told him he figured he was cooler than most people, but the boy quickly brought up his claim about being bad, so he fixed it, saying he was a bad person who wanted to be cooler than the good ones. The child burst out laughing because none of that made any sense. They laughed together, and the protagonist joked that the world was full of strange people. In the end, the boy said he hoped there were more people like Zeke, because then things would be better. When it got too late, he said goodbye and headed off. The Nimble suddenly remembered something and turned back, but the boy was already gone. Far away stood a shabby little house. The child ran home, thinking his mother and father would be happy to have something to eat. He decided that the next time he saw Zich, he'd ask for his name. One day, he wanted to repay everything. But later, in the dark forest, the boy spotted two people making a deal. One handed over a bag that looked full of valuable coins. Knowing it was dangerous, the boy tried to hurry away. Then, one of the men pulled back his hood and noticed the little witness staring at them. The boy froze in fear when he realized he'd been seen, and the bread slipped from his hands. Meanwhile, Zich was back at the inn with Hans and Snock. He thought that next time he saw the child, he'd bring him something besides bread. Even after getting closer to the boy, he still didn't know his name. Out in the forest, the child panicked, with no idea how to get out alive. The next morning, the three headed back into the forest to clear out more monsters. Snock reported that after searching the whole area, those were the only enemies they found. That made Zich think the region was no longer in danger. Even the number of wild beasts had dropped, so the monsters must have moved there because something had thrown the balance off. For now, that village should be safe from both monsters and beasts. With that done, they could get ready to move on. When they returned to the village, people welcomed them with thanks. The old man thanked them over and over, saying he had no idea how to repay what they'd done. Hans seemed to enjoy hearing that, even while saying it was nothing special. Then Snock noticed it had been a while since they'd seen the child. Before leaving, Zich really wanted to find him. Someone nearby asked if they meant the boy who lived past the wooden fence. Another man said the child used to come help with odd jobs, but no one had seen him for days. Snock grew worried, while Hans guessed the boy might have gone to another village. Zich started walking and told the others to come with him. Snock asked where they were going. Hans was stunned to realize their leader still had no real route in mind. Even so, he was set on going to the boy's home. Before long, they reached a much poorer village. Hans and Snock were shocked that people lived in such harsh conditions. Using his senses, Zich couldn't detect anyone nearby. Still, he kept searching for the child. Then his face changed when he picked up something strange. A second later, he leaped across the rooftops and stopped before a wooden door. There, he felt it. Someone was dying. Without hesitating, he kicked the door open. Inside was a terrible sight, two wounded bodies on the floor. Once he realized they were dead, he searched for the one person still alive. There against the wall was the little boy, with a tattoo on his chest. Panicking, Zich tries to wake the boy, but gets no response. Then he notices the child is still breathing and quickly gives him a potion. A strange force starts leaking out from the tattoo. The boy slowly opens his eyes when he senses the protagonist nearby. Zich tells him he came looking after, noticing he was gone, and the child understands right away. When MC asks who did this, the boy says he doesn't know. All he remembers is a stranger showing up in the middle of the night. A little later, that man killed his father and his mother, without the slightest mercy. Worse, he warned the boy not to scream during the torture, if he wanted his parents to live. Zich can tell that was a lie. The man never meant to spare them, and seemed to enjoy it all. After torturing his parents, he went after the rest of the village too. The boy breaks down, crushed by the pain, because the killer blamed everything on him. He gently pats his head and tells him none of this was his fault. The child never saw the man's full face, but he knows he was bald and had tattoos over half of it. Suddenly, a sharp pain hits his chest. Zich immediately uses his power to help and heal him. A strong wave of energy spreads out, and the pain finally leaves the boy's body. The protagonist tells him to stay calm, he'll handle everything from here, but the child is too weak, and soon he passes out. Before moving, Zich sets a piece of bread by the boy's hand. Then a strange sound from the door pulls his attention away. His subordinates arrive and freeze at what they see. They can barely believe it, and MC rises a moment later and tells them to get ready to leave. Their next stop is the person who can help them take revenge for the child. The three stand before the fire used to burn the bodies. Shaken, Snock prays that everyone there can finally rest. Hans never thought the boss would arrange a funeral for a boy he'd only met a few times. And on top of that, he planned to avenge him. So Hans starts to think this isn't only about justice. Zich can do kind things, but pure kindness alone was never what drove him. Still, the boy's death made that kindness pointless, and seeing someone he liked tortured to death clearly hit his pride hard. By the next morning, only bones were left. Zich gathers the remains and places them in a large jar. After that, the group is ready to move out. Their next destination is a place far removed from that ruined village. A young woman opens a heavy door and is surprised by what she finds. An old man smiles back at her. Soon, she tells him her prayers went well. He then lets her know she has visitors. Confused, she can't imagine who would come all the way here to see her. At the same time, the three are waiting at a table over tea. Hans and Snock realize the Order of Carwenman is even bigger than they thought, and Zich has serious connections. When the girl sees her guests, she's stunned to find the protagonist there. Weiji is also happy to see that MC is doing well. As they shake hands, he still seems uneasy with the body of a Smyrn. The young woman smiles and starts chatting with Hans, but Snock is new to her, and she doesn't know him at all. Smiling, Zich says he already heard the news. Soon she'll receive the middle name Premil, a title given only to saints. Weiji adds that she only has one final task left before earning it. He then makes a bold offer for that last achievement. He says the target is something huge and important, which instantly grabs their attention. With a hard look in his eyes, he offers them the chance to wipe out Vald's northern branch. The girl is left speechless by that reveal. Weiger asks if the ones behind the boy's death were those Vald bastards. Zicha says he recognized the burned mark on the boy's chest, a dark spell that keeps someone from dying. Hearing that, Hans looks completely lost. The protagonist explains that the spell ties a person's life force to dark energy, so they stay alive even with fatal wounds. It's mostly used for torture, letting monsters play with a person's body. Weijisk asks if he learned anything else about the man. Vact only knows he was bald and had tattoos over half his face. Then someone at the table says the name Colin Treslow. MC immediately realizes the girl knows who they're after. Colin is one of Vald's cardinals, just below the Pope, and he's known for every kind of evil. That makes Hans realize Colin had been in that village. Vaich figures the man stopped there for supplies and found some cruel entertainment on the side. Since the victims were slum dwellers, no one would have cared much. The odd part is that the nearby mountains suddenly filled with monsters, even orcs. Weijai thinks it over and realizes something is seriously wrong. Now that he knows Vald is involved, he says the Carwin men are ready to fight. That helps, since each already knows where Vald's northern branch and other bases are. Weijai can hardly believe he has that much information. The protagonist just smiles and says he happened to come across it. Along with knowing about the magic seal from the earlier incident, he understands many things. That seal spell was something he had seen before his regression. First, they decide to check the northern branch under Zicha's lead. Weijai says that if fate is on their side, Trisloa may be there in charge. MC is burning with anger and the need for revenge. Because of that tattooed man, he never even got to learn the child's name. The scene shifts to a barren, empty area. Weijai rides on, thinking about what lies ahead. Looking around, he admits he never knew a place like this existed. Weijai had thought the man knew almost everything in the world, but that clearly wasn't true. Then he realizes no one could ever know all of God's creations. He notices that's exactly how a religious man would think. At last, Weijai tells him that if the protagonist ever came to believe in Karna, he'd likely think the same way. Even after hearing that, Zeich still shows no interest in the Karna men. A moment later, Weij starts doubting whether Vald's northern branch is really here. After all, Vald's god is a god of water, so people say their temples should always be built near water, but this place looks dry as dust. Zeke smiles and says that's exactly why no one found it. Weijif admits that makes perfect sense. It would be the ideal cover. Not long after, a powerful gust slams into them. MC says they should keep crossing and head a little farther. They leave the horses by the mountains and continue on foot. Together they quietly search for any clue. A massive hole finally reveals the entrance to Vald's hideout. Set on moving forward, they step into the cave with lamps in hand. Something ahead leaves Weij stunned. The cavern glows with bright blue light. He never expected to find a lake under land this dry. Then they spot people moving on the far side. At once they duck behind a rock to stay hidden. Both of them watch more carefully. Deep in the cave stands a huge palace surrounded by water. At the top of it is the symbol of Vald, and Weijif finally knows for sure they found a temple. Zeich asks if he believes him now. Taking his hand, Weijif says he'll gather the best Carwinmen. After they return, everyone gathers around a large table. The Carwinman Pope is pleased to finally meet him. Even so, something about him seems to be on Zeich's mind. The protagonist didn't expect to meet the zombie creator from the Demon King era this closely. Back then, that man healed paladins from the rear and kept one knight from dying. At the time, MC had nearly been killed by him. He also never thought he'd meet the Pope at all, since the man rarely saw visitors. The Pope then thanks him for revealing Vald's location, but Zeke only helped because he has his own goal. Curious, the Pope asks about this personal revenge. He plans to slip into the temple while the main force attacks outside. Then the Pope asks if he means to kill the man behind the child's death, and the answer shocks everyone. Zeke has no plan to make it easy. Realizing what he means, the Pope is a little disturbed, but he understands. Colin Trisloa is pure evil. Still, Colin is extremely strong and can't be taken lightly. He's as powerful as one of the Carwinmen's high-ranking priests. That's why the Pope wants to be sure the protagonist will survive. MC simply says he won't let anyone interfere. The whole operation must stay secret. They can't risk leaks. Until then, the three can stay in the temple, where it's safer. Just then, a voice calls for His Holiness. Before things move on, Zeke asks the Pope for one favor. Hand to chest. He says he wants the title of honorary paladin. Everyone at the table is stunned. The Pope, though, wants to know why. Zeke says there isn't any deep reason. He just thinks the title would annoy Trisloa even more. As the day passes, evening starts to set in. They end up talking about how unusual he is. Weijifet says the young man may be odd, but he's highly capable and won't disgrace them with the title. The Pope agrees and accepts the protagonist's request. He also mentions there's another honorary paladin as strong and noble as Zeke, so the Pope wants that man to join the battle too. Trying to remember, the Pope brings up the knight named Glenzangard. Hearing that name, the girl perks up right away. Seeing her react, the Pope asks if something is wrong. She remembers that when Glenn Zangard met her, he asked if she had any troubles she wanted to talk about. Laughing, Waija says the knight was probably interested in her. Either way, Glenn couldn't join them. He was far away, and reaching him wasn't easy. The girl only gets more embarrassed. Waija offers to speak to the warrior for her, but she quickly turns him down. In the end, she says she doesn't think Glenn likes her that way. Deep down, she feels he was after something else. To her, Glenn Zane be searching for something. At the same time, the caravan kept moving fast through the desert. Waija led the mounted warriors across the sands. Inside the wagon, the others prayed for protection in the coming battle. Then the master orders everyone to halt. They had reached the cave entrance. The girl realizes this is where it all starts. Waija's more than ready to judge Valta's followers. Getting off his horse, Zeit says he'll go in first. His plan hasn't changed. He'll infiltrate the temple alone. The girl still looks uneasy. MC tries to calm her down, saying that even if he's caught, he knows nothing useful they can force out of him. When he notices that's not what she meant, he gently tells her not to worry. Before leaving, he asks them to protect his subordinates until he returns, reminding them he's trained them to handle themselves. Joking around, he adds that it'd be a real shame if the two of them died. After saying goodbye, he jumps into the cave. The others can only worry about his safety. Waija knows they have no choice now but to trust Zich completely, so they press forward together, ready to begin the attack. Suddenly soldiers start shouting that there's an emergency. The alarm is clear. The Carwoodman forces are closing in on the lake. The troops rush ahead at full speed while others cover the rear. Inside the temple, a boy by the door notices unusual movement. He starts to wonder what's going on, but a hand grabs his head and yanks him back. Zich had already slipped inside and was moving into place. He soon realizes nothing here has really changed. He had worried things might be different after the regression, but everything looked the same. Since he was alone, he could swim through the lake without being noticed. Figuring the Carwoodmen were handling things outside, he focuses on what matters most. Then he reaches the prayer room, where the key item should be hidden. Without hesitating, he pushes open the heavy doors. Inside, he spots a strange triangular object shining brightly. It looks important enough to be Tresloa's top priority. Zelk smiles, pleased that he got there first. Now all he has to do is wait there for the man to arrive. Outside, a huge blast sends debris flying. The soldiers fight hard to push the enemy back. In panic, one man reports that the enemy is advancing through the lake. There are about 1,000 of them, making the battle even worse. That number matches everyone inside the temple, and from the look of it, they're all Grail Knights or High Priests. Callan and Tresloa are clearly annoyed that the enemy found them. Calling for help isn't an option, and the Carwoodmen are strong. An order goes out to stop the enemy advance through the lake. A subordinate quickly relays the command to the troops. After sizing up the battle, Callan waits for the right moment. While his men handle the fighting, he decides to check on his precious item. He rushes downstairs without a second glance. The tattooed man only wants to make sure the item is safe and pray for victory. But when he gets there, he's horrified. Zich had already taken Tresloa's treasured artifact. Furious, he starts to realize the person before him caused all of this. He says he came because he has a personal grudge. The cardinal can hardly believe it, and charges at him. But he stops cold when Zich says his full name with that look on his face. Burning with anger, the protagonist demands to know if this is the man who killed that child. The cardinal looks confused, as if he can't remember. He gets even more irritated, unable to believe someone broke into the temple just to bring up this nonsense. In the end, he says he can't remember every person he's killed. Soon, his troops line up behind him. At one command, they can wipe Zich out. Still, MC had wanted to hear from the man's own mouth why he killed a helpless child. He asks if Tresloa remembers slaughtering a poor village and torturing one defenseless boy. Then, the man's face changes, and he admits he did it. That night, he had only planned to get food in the city, but after finding the boy, he changed course and decided to wipe out the whole village. He talks about the boy's family and neighbors like they were nothing more than a package. In the end, he put all the blame for the massacre on that one child. Since they died by the hand of one blessed by Voldy, he says they should have seen it as an honor. Zich asks if he actually told that child it was all his fault. With a cruel smile, the man says he wanted to teach him what responsibility means. He takes in every word. Then the cardinal remembers the enemy is still advancing, and there's no time to talk. Tresloa is stunned when the boy in front of him reveals the truth. Zich declares that he was the one who led the Carwoodmen to this temple, all to bring down Kalan. Even so, the man can't believe a boy like this could kill him. With sadness in his eyes, the protagonist says he knew the child Kalan murdered. The cardinal still can't believe anyone would go this far over a single child. Zek repeats the man's own words that everyone in that slum died because of the boy. If Callan had stayed in the temple and never stepped outside again, they never would have met. But now, MC is set on destroying everyone in his way. He says everything happening here is Callan Tresloa's fault. Hearing that, the cardinal's anger boils over. He unleashes his power, filling the room with magic. Water spells surge towards Zik as he waits for an opening. Leaping aside, he can tell the attack is deadly. With one hand, he grabs an artifact attached to the wall. From afar, the cardinal watches his strange movements. Still taunting him, Zik says he'll teach him what responsibility really means. Laughing, he mocks Vald's fish-headed fool for never teaching his followers to answer for what they do. Callan grows even angrier and attacks again with more spells. Water floods the room and sweeps him away, but he manages to catch hold of a window. Done waiting, the man orders his soldiers to strike. A storm of sharp blades flies at Zik. In one motion he grabs his sword and shows just how skilled he is. The enemies are stunned. He blocks everything without a scratch. As he puts his weapon away, he tells them not to get too worked up. If they aren't careful, they might damage the valuable item he's holding. Trislo can't believe this boy had the nerve to steal it. The artifact called the Vengeful Spirit of the Pyramid is used to control monsters. The Cardinal is shocked that someone so young knows that much. Then the pyramid starts glowing in his hands. The Vengeful Spirit of the Pyramid can control any monster, but to make it work, Dis needed the dark feelings of an innocent soul. Before the regression, Vald completed it through cruel methods, including torturing a child. Most likely that torture was only done to meet the artifact's conditions. The monsters in the forest may have been drawn to it on instinct. Hanging from the window, Zik warns that he can smash the artifact at any second, but Trisloa knows the pyramid is far harder to break than the boy's body. Showing off his power, he says he was fated to kill a boy in the most painful way possible. A spell is fired straight at the protagonist. He lets go of the ledge and tries to dodge the attacks by instinct. Smiling, Trisloa asks how long he thinks he can keep running from his magic. Zik knows he can handle the minions, but not Trisloa in his current state. He admits the man is stronger, and fighting him head-on would be foolish. Worse, the Cardinal has no intention of letting him escape. Even so, MC catches hold of a brick in the wall. Then he starts climbing with everything he has. Trisloa can't figure out what he's trying to do. A moment later, he notices something odd, higher up. Zik is standing before a hidden passage. He warns them that this is how he'll get away. Before leaving, he throws one more taunt at the soldiers. In the north wing of Vald's underground prison, lights mark a narrow path. Zik appears holding a ring of keys that can open every door. The prisoners inside are furious. Smiling, he asks if they want revenge. The battle rages on inside the temple. The soldiers do everything they can to stop the Carwoodmen. They have to keep them from breaking into the temple. Then a terrifying power suddenly fills the area. A spell shoots toward Wige, but he doesn't move. The priests begin praying for help from the goddess Karna. Soon after, the force around them wipes the spell away. A subordinate reports that the soldiers who crossed the lake were defeated. Annoyed, Wige realizes he'll have to fight himself. Sword in hand, he shows a chilling expression. He leaps toward the temple, and the impact triggers an explosion that blasts debris everywhere. But the place is covered by a strong shield. The barrier is tougher than expected, and blocks repeated attacks. Even so, that blow still dropped every soldier near the lake, giving them the opening they needed to get across. Determined, a soldier drives a stake into the ground. Then they set the wooden pieces into the water. With the whole troop working together, they build a bridge to the temple. As soon as it was done, the paladins charged the moment the attack order came. From the other side, the enemy spotted the Carwoodmen coming. They knew they had to stop this threat no matter what. A strong spell was fired to destroy the bridge. Even with warnings about the danger, Ayn seemed completely fearless. Clutching her cross, she prayed to Karna for strength for the faithful. At the same time, Wige and his men kept pushing forward. Every swing showed just how skilled and deadly he was. Soon it was clear the shield still had no cracks. Vald's forces weren't watching the other paladins. They were too focused on Wige. For the moment, all they could do was hold position and let the soldiers keep fighting. Even then, they knew they were still losing ground. But if the barrier fell, they could damage the base and turn things around. So now everything depended on Zix breaking that barrier. Inside the temple, things were falling apart. Callan was desperate to find the boy who took the sacred relic. Getting that item back was all that mattered. Even after searching everywhere, the soldiers still couldn't find Zix. The Cardinal couldn't believe the boy knew a hidden route he didn't. A soldier reports that the boy vanished from sight. Trislayua suddenly kicks the man with full force. Furious, he shouts that the boy was carrying the vengeful spirit of the pyramid. The soldier hurriedly apologizes and says he'll search again. As the man leaves, the Cardinal watches in growing anger. Then he forces himself to calm down and think. A few minutes earlier, the boy had said he came for revenge. He had also brought the Carwoodman to the temple, and judging by how he reacted to the relic, stealing it was never his real goal. That's when the Cardinal realizes the boy was after the barrier all along. Elsewhere, people had gathered around the statue to pray for protection. Such slips into the holy room without drawing attention. Even so, the knights sense him and pull their swords. To his surprise, Trisloa had noticed him too. The Cardinal raises a hand and starts casting. Then the hit lands. Blood stains Zeich's clothes and pain tears through his body. Trisloa and his men had gotten there first and set an ambush. He immediately orders everyone to chase the boy. Their top priority was getting the relic back safely. Behind Callan, the doors slowly began to close. Meanwhile, the others kept praying with all they had. Then more people suddenly rush into the room. Zeich had freed the prisoners from the dungeon. He gave them a shot at revenge against the bastards who planned to sacrifice them, so they were ready to cut down anyone guarding the barrier. At the same time, the Cardinal and his soldiers caught up to the protagonist. He was weak and bleeding badly, so he hadn't made it far. Trisloa declares that this is the boy's end. Then cracks spread through the temple, and stones start falling from every side. Zyke gives a small smile. His plan had worked. Outside, the knights kept fighting hard. Hans avoided a heavy blow by using everything MC had taught him. Seeing an opening, he slammed a strike into his enemy's body. The young fighter realizes his body is almost moving by itself. Zyke's training was doing something incredible. Meanwhile, more soldiers moved in to stop the Kuruman. Stones rose in their path and blocked their advance. The men were left confused by what was happening. From a distance, Snock was using all his power to cast destructive magic. If he could break that narrow path, he could wipe them all out. But that might backfire, since the damage could spread through the whole cave. Then everyone senses a sudden change. A moment later, the shield starts to vanish completely. The soldiers are stunned, unable to understand what just happened. Weich realizes Zyke succeeded. Now they had to move fast before the barrier could be rebuilt. The holy warriors rushed the temple, calling on Karna as they moved to destroy the base. Powerful spells slammed into the temple one after another. The whole structure shook like it was caught in a massive earthquake. Even then, Callan tells his subordinates to stay calm. Zyke says the barrier protecting the place was gone. That's why the temple was under attack. That only made the man glare at him with even more rage. He had to stop taunting him for now and buy time while the others finished the job. He was the only intruder inside the temple. The rest were outside. The ones helping him here were the prisoners meant to be sacrifices. Trisloa can't believe the brothers guarding the barrier were killed by the offerings. When he realizes the man still doesn't believe him, Zyke suddenly takes off running. Callan was already readying another spell. His magic shoots for the boy but only blasts a crack into the wall. Zeke just smiles, almost amused by how this is going. The soldiers rush after him, set on killing him. Callan Trisloa was determined to see how long the boy could keep escaping. Soon, the protagonist reaches a huge door. Spells keep flying after him without pause. With one kick, he smashes part of the wood. Realizing the boy had entered the ritual room, Callan calls for the paladins. The rest were ordered to shut the entrance and wait for more commands. The cardinal smiles, glad he finally found the rat he was chasing, but his face changes at once when he sees the damage inside. He can't believe what he's looking at. Then Zeke steps out from behind the big statue, clearly noticing that shock. At that point, the tattooed man only wanted to know where the bastards who caused this mess were, but MC couldn't tell him that. He only guessed the man escaped through the secret path he had shown them. Completely shaken, the cardinal demands to know why all this happened. Zeke tells him to ask the fishhead watching everything so closely. Trisloa can't believe how boldly the boy speaks to Vald. Then without the slightest fear, he calls on the great Vald himself. Raising his hands, he asks the god to reveal who was really behind this disaster. He quickly slips behind the statue. Then a voice says Cardinal Trisloa is the one to blame for killing an innocent boy in the village and creating someone's thirst for revenge. This was the result of his own actions. Stepping out again, Zeke tells him he has his answer now. Trisloa's face shows pure panic as he fails to make sense of it. The protagonist smiles, knowing his mission is done. Orders go out to search every hall in the temple and find Vald's bastards. Zeke even warns the fishhead that he'll threaten it too if Callan turns on him. Enraged, the man gathers his power again. Without caring about the cost, he fires spells at MC, but the boy slips away, and the statue takes the damage instead. Trisloa orders his men to kill every threat still inside the temple. They obey at once, ready to fight. From here on, it was a race against time. Zeke knew he only had to hold out until the Kuruman arrived. Weapon in hand, he braces for the attacks coming at him. He moves fast, striking hard to avoid the enchanted plates. He also hurls one back at his enemy, smashing him in the chest. Trisloa grows even more furious. None wasting time, he forms a stronger spell and fires it at Zeke. Even then, he slips away without a scratch. Soon he looks trapped, with nowhere left to run. Callan sees it as the perfect chance to finish him. Now all the soldiers would attack together. Their goal was simple: kill Zeke and take back the vengeful spirit of the pyramid. Then a blazing wave of power tears through the room. Soldiers are struck down one after another before they can react. Aineen and Bell reappear, ready to protect the protagonist. The men trade sharp looks, their anger plain to see. The two apologize for being late, but they're glad Zeke is still safe. Curious, Ainee asks what he's holding. MC explains that it's the vengeful spirit of the pyramid, a sacred relic. Once completed, it lets its owner control every monster in the world. A moment later, he throws the artifact to the floor. With his sword, he threatens to destroy it right there. Trisloa panics and begs him to stop. Meanwhile, more soldiers rush in to keep fighting. Then Wizik appears and swiftly cuts down the enemies. Callan is stunned by the force behind the old man's attack. Zixshem pulls Trisloa's focus back to him and repeats the same thing, that all of this was Trisloa's fault. Then he drives his sword into the holy relic without mercy. Trisloa falls into despair when he sees the item ruined. Something begins to spill out of the pyramid as the blade sinks deeper. Dropping to his knees, the cardinal realizes all his plans are shattered. That gives Belry the perfect chance to unleash all his pent-up rage on him. One strike sends the man to the ground before he can defend himself. A knight notices his master has been hurt, but enemy soldiers attack him too. Trisloa's face shows nothing but fear. Sword in hand, Belri is ready to deliver Karna's judgment. Then an explosion suddenly rips through the room. Ein watches from a distance, worried about Lord Wizzy. Even so, he was unharmed. Trisloa had thrown up a barrier at the last second and escaped. Now the best move was to search the temple together. But Einwi's attention shifts elsewhere. Zich had vanished too, without a trace. Someone walks through a dry, barren place. Trisloa feels pleased, knowing nobody else knew of that secret passage. Even so, he never thought everything would fall apart this easily. Worst of all, he had lost the vengeful spirit of the pyramid. Thinking of the boy's face only makes his anger grow. From now on, his life's goal was to destroy Zeke. More than killing him, he wanted Trisloa to suffer. Then his eyes fill with fear when a familiar voice calls out. From the mountaintop, Zeke had been watching Trislo. Smiling, he says he missed the cardinal. Trislo is stunned. He can't figure out how he found this hidden place. The protagonist tells him not to act so surprised by what he can do. In one leap, he closes the distance. MC knew part of the temple, even the locals didn't know about. Growing impatient, the cardinal rushes in with his power ready. Zik shuts him down with only a few blows. Then he slams a hit into Trisloa's stomach. Pain quickly spreads through the man's whole body. Meanwhile, he is already set for round 2. Covering his nose, he points out how disgusting his opponent smells. Even if Callan died here, he'd still be a proud follower of Vald. Still, he was set on dragging the boy down with him. But Zik wasn't planning to kill him, just make him suffer. Instead, he sets up a game. Dodge every trap before the sand in the hourglass runs out. If he wins, he can leave in peace. The protagonist gets everything in place and prepares to begin. The cardinal wastes no time and runs in desperation. In that dry wasteland, he moves ahead with no idea where to go. The first trap looks pretty simple. Annoyed, Trislo thinks only about taking revenge on Zik fast. He tries to cross, but spikes stab into one of his feet. Just like that, he loses the first round. After escaping the trap, he keeps going with a limp. This time, he swears he won't fall for another trick. But then he steps on a line in the ground and triggers the second trap. Heavy cement balls come flying at him. He can't avoid them and loses again. With cuts on his face, his anger only grows. Meanwhile, Zik watches it all from the top of the mountain. Trisloa has no clue how much time he has left to finish the challenge. Even so, he stays alert and watches every step. Then all of a sudden, water gets poured over him. Confused, he can't make sense of it. Zik comes up from behind and kicks his heels out. He jokes that there wasn't much to soak anyway, since the man was bald. The third trap was MC himself, and it was the hardest one yet. Time keeps passing, and the cardinal keeps moving through the exhaustion. At last, he finds the exit. But instead of leaving, he looks around for the boy. Zik is holding the hourglass with only a little sand left inside. At that moment, Trislo realizes he actually cleared the game. He gives a shrug and admits he did make it. Even so, mercy was never part of the deal. Zik drives a blow into his chest, and pain tears through the cardinal's body, while the boy stays cold. Then he forces the sword in deeper and deeper. The man drops to the ground, far too worn out to fight. Smiling, the protagonist says he was a skilled liar and never worth trusting. A moment later, he shoves Colin's body down. Now it was time to save the poor soul. Zik says he'll bless the road ahead in Karna's name, the god he may hate most. Trislo immediately begs him to get that insignia out of his face. MC tells him he should pay for his sins before the dead boy and his family and the villagers. Reading from a book, he says a path to Karna will open, and he shouldn't fear it, because the goddess will cover him in light. All his fear and filthy desires would vanish once he was freed. In the end, his loyalty and faith would go with him. Suddenly, Trisloa starts to think he might already be dead. His body now seems to be in a completely different, beautiful place. Then he feels a strange power beside him and mistakes it for Valley. After all those years of devotion, he thinks Valley has finally come to save him. Instead, a horrifying creature appears with huge red eyes, collapsed on the ground. The cardinal can't understand what he's seeing. To his shock, the voice repeats Zeech's words. It was all his fault. Soon after, Trisloa breathes his last. He looks at the container of bones and says his revenge is done. He walks over calmly and opens the jar. Now the child could move on to a new place. The next day, the temple was destroyed. The Karwen men and Zich brought down the northern branch building of Valo. When Wyche saw Trislo's body, he said he wanted to hang the head in front of the temple. But after hearing the plan for handling the corpse so Valo wouldn't get a funeral, he dropped the idea. Not long after, they all headed back with their horses. Hans asks if it was really fine for him to travel with the Karwen men. Zich says it's no issue, since they're going the same way anyway. Even so, getting help from those men still hurt his... When he saw Mr. Waig, the soldier looked thrilled. The old man smiles, clearly glad to see Twen. The knight explains he came with allied forces to help, but arrived too late. While they talk, Zik looks bored. Then his eyes land on a strange figure. In his past life, the Demon King had met this man before, and still held some anger toward him. It was Glenn Zenard, looking impressive on horseback. Soon night settles over the camp. A big meal is laid out, and Twin is glad to see the Carwoodman finally catching a break. On top of that, both sides now had honorary paladins. As they eat and drink, they talk about their recent wins. Zick never expected to run into Glenn Zenard in a moment like this. Even so, the knights seem happy to meet him. The protagonist simply introduces himself and opens the conversation with a question. The paladin listens without any trouble. Then Zick repeats the same words he once said in the past, saying he hoped he'd be better in his next life. Glenn Zenard doesn't understand what he means, and looks confused. Curious, he asks why MC would say something so strange, but he stays silent. The two boys lock eyes while their elders watch closely. With a laugh, Zick lies and says it was just a line from a soap opera, and the hero looked a lot like the paladin. Twin cuts in, saying Zenard really does look like a hero. Smiling awkwardly, the boy seems embarrassed by the compliment. A moment later, he grows tense when he hears a familiar voice. Aline says Zenard had already done a lot for the car women, but Zick was a real hero too. Still, she adds that the protagonist doesn't exactly look like one. As they chat like old friends, Zenard watches the whole thing. Then he steps in and lightly scolds the future saint, saying she was acting improperly. She apologizes right away, but Twin tells her to relax. Saints can joke with friends too. Wave adds that people had started liking her more because of her recent changes. Glenn Zenard quickly apologizes for what he said, but she tells him there's no need. She also says that thanks to Lord Zick, what happened in Porty became a turning point. Interested, the paladin asks what they were talking about since it sounded important. Just like in the novel, someone once told MC he should treat people better. That was the reason he started doing good things. It was a man tied to justice, the kind of person Zick never really liked. Still, if they ever met again, there were things he wanted to say. He wanted to tell him he was living the way he suggested, and it wasn't that bad. While they talk, Hans, Snock, and Naum tear through the food. He asks Zenard what he thinks about that way of living. He wanted to know if the paladin had found his answer. Outside, two guards make a quiet round through the camp. Back in his bed, Zick is worn out from the long day. As he stares up, he keeps thinking about Glenn Zenard. Deep down, he doesn't believe the man is a regressor, or that he knows anything. But if changing fate really depended on regression, then maybe Zenard had gone back too. Then again, maybe regression had nothing to do with it at all. Or maybe that man was only pretending not to know him. In the end, Zick realizes there's nothing more he can do. He doesn't care whether Zenard regressed or not, because he has no plans to get involved with him. He only wanted to say he was living the way he had been told, and it wasn't so bad. In this life, the protagonist's tie to Glenn Zenard ends here. In another tent, the paladin is lost in thought. He watches a burning candle and thinks about Zick. The face was the same, but the actions and personality were completely different. One thing was certain, MC was nothing like the Demon Kings of Power anymore, and he also wasn't the heir of Margrave, his steel wall. So Zenard starts fitting the clues together and thinks about Zick's line. Still, he couldn't sense the aura of justice tied to the brave family. That left only one possible answer, a variable. Even after all that thinking, Zenard still can't understand why. If he acts too soon, it could create a bigger problem. Zick changes depending on the situation, and Zenard knows that better than anyone after living far longer than most. In the end, the protagonist might become a threat. That's why Zenard starts wondering if killing him would be the safest choice. But first, he needs to learn what caused that variable. He also has to find out whether innocent Ani has changed too. And finally, he needs to know who caused Zick's change. All at once, he starts seeing countless variables in the regression. For now, he decides to rest, make a plan, and send someone to watch MC. After that, he would need a way to weaken Vild's power. His mind drifts back to the dinner. That thought kept him from sleeping. He kept wondering why that question was asked. The next morning, under clear skies, Zick said goodbye to Ain. He and his companions were already set to go. To them, the hero was like the wind. He showed up, then was gone. Ain wished he had stayed to rest a bit longer and hoped they'd meet again. As they walked, Zick asked if his companions forgot anything. Hans answered with a grin that they had everything. He then realized he had no real plan and no idea where to go next. His mind drifted to the sword tied to the protagonist Mower, the Demon King of Power. Thornium was no ordinary blade. It was incredibly powerful. The three paused, trying to decide their next move. In the end, Zick chose the tourist city of Violuin. It was famous for treating visitors well. Guests were welcomed with music and great food. In the middle of town, a hooded person stared at the food stalls. She looked starving. Then a man pulled back the hood and exposed her face. Zick recognized her at once. The girl who fought him in the forest. Smiling, he noted it had been a while. The moment she recognized him, her face changed completely. They stayed still, trading sharp looks. Viortwin was small, but packed with things for travelers to enjoy. Once they arrived, Zick gave Hans and Snock the day off. The two wasted no time diving into everything the city offered. With his stomach growling, MC went to find something to eat. Then a strange figure caught his eye. When he pulled back the girl's hood, he knew exactly who she was. Even though she was tense, she gave no sign that she planned to attack. Not long after, he bought food for them to share. He handed her a skewer, and she looked like she badly needed it. Still, She clearly wasn't used to that kind of kindness. Zich was hungry too, so he tore through his food. Annoyed, she asked if he remembered what happened between them. He just shrugged, trying to dodge the topic. Then he jokingly asked if they had been lovers. Hearing that, she turned and started to leave. At last, she asked what he really wanted from her. When he mentioned a date, she called him out. Those clearly weren't his real motives. She also had no interest in opening up about her own life. Curious, she asked what made him think she'd say yes. Zich admitted he wasn't sure, he just felt like he understood her a little. Then he offered her food again. The only thing he knew for sure was that she wanted the skewer. The two sat by a fountain and ate together. Zich could tell she was starving from how fast she ate. If he'd bought her expensive food, he might have gone broke. Trying to get the conversation going, he asked for her name, while wondering if it was too early to ask. A moment later, she finally answered. Her name was Lila. For a while, both of them sat in silence. Zich studied her face with interest. He thought Lila suited her perfectly. A bunch of colorful balloons drifted through the city. After that, they walked around together, looking for more food. Zich bought drinks for both of them. Then something ahead seemed to catch Lila's eye. It was a shop full of fancy dresses. Soon they went into the store, and she started trying clothes on. Each outfit made her stand out even more. From a distance, Zich watched carefully. Later, they headed into a crowded bar. There, he said she could dress up for their date if she wanted. Lila didn't think that was a good enough reason to dress up for a human. Zich pushed back, saying she looked great in everything anyway. Soon, the waiter brought over 2 beers. The protagonist offered one to Lila, saying it would help her relax. Trusting him enough, she took a drink. When the mood settled at the table, MC asked if she really drank it. With a suspicious look, he said he had slipped a potion into the beer, but Lila casually replied that beer needed a little poison to taste refreshing. The two exchanged quiet, careful looks. Curious, Zich asked what she really was. She answered, but only because she also wanted to know what he was. Lila wanted to know if the man in front of her was the real him. She said she never remembered changing her own name, but she remembered that he did. That made him ask if she meant Mo. But Lila brought up a different name, Brave. If he was going to pick another surname, she thought Brave sounded better than Mo. The protagonist quietly turned over the name Brave in his head. Just then, a fight broke out in the bar. MC recognized one of the voices right away. A second later, he spotted Hans and Snock. He pushed through the crowd toward them. The two were standing in the middle of the bar, facing a group of thugs. Snock explained they overheard something, got dragged into trouble, and even ignoring it didn't help. Zich looked over the mess, a little puzzled. Then one of the men noticed the beautiful girl from the market. Grinning, he walked up and asked Lila out. Snock recognized her as the woman from the forest and asked if they should hold her back. For now, they decided just to watch. The man started putting his hands on Lila, clearly pushing too far. Fed up, she began to transform, ready to put him down. The white-haired girl was seconds from attacking. The thug mocked her and asked why she was acting hard to get now. Her red eyes flared with anger. In 2 quick leaps, the young man closed in. Zeke and Hans watched, both thinking the guy was a complete idiot. Then one of his friends rushed in, raising a fist and demanding to know who she thought she was dealing with. Lila barely reacted. She only stared him down and readied her power again. But then something made her pause. Zik stepped in and caught the man's punch with one hand. He used that opening to slam the guy with a punch of his own. The thug flew backward and crashed near his friends. The others lost it and charged him with weapons drawn. A short while later, the idiots were on the floor, beaten up and apologized. Afterward, the protagonist asked the white-haired girl how she shocked one of them earlier and just how badly she burned him. Instead of answering, she asked why he didn't kill the man. Zikl, surprised, asked how she could say that so easily. Then she pointed out that if he was so kind, shouldn't he avoid violence? Memsi shot back that people like that deserved a beating. Lila agreed, then stopped walking, and looked up at the moon in silence. A moment later, she asked if his questioning was over because she wanted to leave. Zik made it clear he wasn't done and grabbed the girl's hand, asking her to wait a minute. Hans and Snock could only stare with their mouths open. Then he said he'd be busy the next day, but wanted to meet her 10 days later, at the same place, for a date. He said it would be ridiculous to part ways without learning more about each other, especially since she'd spent the whole day watching him. With a smile, Lila agreed. Then she quickly walked off. As she left, Sikshi thought he'd gotten closer to her than expected, and needed to learn who she really was. It was suspicious that such a strong mage had no money, and knew so little. She acted like she understood the world, yet had to beg for food and borrow clothes. So the protagonist figured she had to be from the future, someone with knowledge but no real experience. Hans walked up and got his attention to ask if they had plans for tomorrow, since he wanted to see the city's attractions. Zilik said he'd go with him, adding that he knew a great spot. The next day, they headed to the ancient ruins of Violiwin. Someone was completely taken by the place. It was Hans and Snock, both wondering who built it, and why. Map in hand, Zelik tried to remember where his old sword, Thornium, was. He admitted he wasn't sure, since in his past life he wrecked the whole route while searching for it. Then they came to an area marked with a warning sign, "Do not enter." Hans asked his master if going in was really a good idea. Before anyone moved, something made all three stop cold. Zyke asked if anyone touched anything, and Snog said he heard a sound from above. The two younger boys guessed something important had to be hidden past it, while MC remembered his old sword was on a secret route, though he couldn't recall any wall like this. He stepped closer and put his hand on the stones, which left Hans confused, because the wall reacted to Zich's touch when it hadn't reacted to his or Snog's. He couldn't figure out why it answered to him or what that strange aura coming through the opening was doing to his senses. Even without answers, the trio chose to go in. Zich quickly realized the place felt familiar, but it definitely wasn't where Thornium rested. Then Hans told him to look where he was pointing. The protagonist stared in shock and saw, atop an altar, the sacred sword tied to Glenn, Estelade driven into the ground. Thornium was the blade that symbolized the Demon King. Zik Moore, Estelade, by contrast, represented the Sun King, Glenn. MC stood frozen, staring at the weapon that killed him in his past life, remembering how picky it was about its owner. Only someone it judged worthy could pull it free. When Hans asked if he knew what it was, Zik said it was a sacred sword. Both boys stared wide-eyed and asked what that meant. Excited, his servant asks if that means he could become a hero by taking the sword. He says yes, and both boys are stunned. Snog asks to go first. The protagonist agrees, though he's sure the sword won't accept him, which would crush his bond with Naoim. Even so, Snog decides to try. He grabs the hilt and pulls with all his strength. The other two watch closely. Nothing happens. Snog finally gives up and steps back. His mole gently rubs his face to comfort him, and he realizes what he needs is already with him. Hans asks if Zich is going to try, but he refuses. He already knows the sword was never meant for him. MC asks if Hans wants a turn. Hans says no, sure he'd fail too. Still, he tells him it's worth trying anyway. Then someone comes sprinting through the halls, and the trio goes on guard. One of them points out that whoever it is came from the other entrance. Zich listens and can tell from the footsteps this person is highly trained. For a second he wonders if Glenn came for his sword, then realizes the steps belong to a woman. It's Lila, the girl he was supposed to meet in 10 days. The young woman runs straight toward them. Zich asks what she's doing here. Right behind her, several hooded men rush in, clearly trying to catch her. The protagonist moves first, and tells Lila to get down, then attacks the men chasing her. A massive blast erupts, knocking Lila to the floor. Zich offers her a hand, and asks if these are her new friends. Getting up, she says no, they were trying to kidnap her. He asks why, but Lila only lowers her head and says nothing. MC grins and jokes that she must be pretty popular, then turns to the enemies, who recover fast. Aiming his sword at them, he asks if they're the same group that corrupted people before, since they're dressed the same way. Instead of answering, one of the men says the plan has changed. He orders his men to keep the girl and Zich alive and kill the others at once. The hooded men rush in with their blades, and Hans is the first one put in danger. Snog jumps in to protect him, and uses Naoim's power, sending stones flying at the attackers. The men going after Hans are thrown back at once. As he fights, Zich sees his friends are holding on, but not for long. He also notices this place is bad for Lila's magic, even though she keeps casting spell after spell. Watching the enemy leader, he judges that the man is as strong as a demon, stronger than him without his demonic sword. The leader attacks without hesitation, and says Zich is even weaker than he expected. The others pause and look over as the protagonist is slammed hard into a wall. One hooded man tells his captain the sacred sword is right beside the boy, but the captain brushes it off because someone like Zich could never be chosen by it. He turns away and tells a subordinate to finish things, kill the two boys, and take the girl alive. The rest can deal with MC. Then the hooded leader feels something strange. When he looks back, he sees someone gripping the sacred sword. Light floods the whole chamber, and instantly blasts away the men nearby. With wide eyes, Snog and Hans stare. Lila does too, shocked to see that Zich has been accepted by the sword. Even he can't believe he pulled it out. He remembers the leader mocking him just moments ago, and that anger pushed him to dig deep enough to seize Estelade, even though he truly believed it would never choose him. As Lila walks up, she asks why he pulled the sword out. Zich asks what kind of question that is. He did it to save everyone. Lila says she meant how he was able to draw it. He answers that only someone the sword judges worthy can lift it, which leaves her speechless for a moment. Then she asks if he really thinks he's worthy. The protagonist honestly says, probably not. After that, he puts the sword back. Lila is stunned and asks why. Zich says it isn't his sword. She asks if he understands what that weapon can do. He says yes, but he plans to use another one. With wide eyes, Lila asks if he means Thornium. Walking past her, MC says he already guessed she knew. Then he checks on Hans and Snog, and both say they're fine, so Zich says they can leave. But Lila suddenly grabs his arm and drags him back toward Estelade, ordering him to take it again and use it instead of Thornium. Zich refuses. He says he only wants his own sword. Annoyed, Lila argues that if he wants to be kind, he needs Estelade, not Thornium. He doesn't get her fear, and says a sword called demonic doesn't make its user evil. Lila goes quiet for a moment, then orders him again to pick up the sword in front of him. The protagonist stares back, unsure what to do. Suddenly, pain shoots through his body, especially his hand. the same finger where he wore the key that twists destiny. Then Estelade starts reacting on its own, forming a huge tornado of yellow light around them. Outside the storm, Snock and Hans yell for Zich, who asks if Lila is causing this. She says no, it isn't magic. She thinks the sword is trying to send them to another realm. With no escape, Zich says they have no choice. He shouts to his two allies and tells them that if he doesn't return soon, they should leave and wait at the inn. Nervous, Hans says only MC can open the door. MC tells them to use the path Lila came from, but she reveals that way is blocked too. To help them, Lila uses her power and throws her ring out of the tornado of light, telling Hans he should be able to open the passage with it. Zich asks what it is, but Lila tells him it's none of his business. The two of them begin to slowly fade away. Worried, Hans tells his lord to be careful. Zich smiles and tells him to worry about himself instead. Then both vanish, leaving only Estelade in the ground. Snock asks if he will be okay, and Hans says yes. The little boy then asks what they should do while waiting for him. Hans looks at the hooded men on the floor and decides it's time to make some easy money. After searching them all, the boys collect a lot of gold and potions. The enemy leader is still out cold, mouth hanging open and no cloak left, because they used it to wrap the money in potions. Snock asks if they should take one, and Hans wonders if it'd be better to stash everything in a chest. Then he looks back at the sacred sword and wonders if he really couldn't pull it out. To settle it, he decides to try. Snock asks if he's serious, and Hans says yes. Hans puts both hands on the hilt and gets ready to pull, while Snock cheers him on from back there. Then something grabs Hans's attention. They turn and see another group of hooded men rushing at them. Hans asks Snock if he can help, and Snock says yes. Hans tells Snock to get ready, not to fight but to run, as daggers start flying at them. Once they're surrounded, one man asks if they were the ones who killed his captain, telling the others to hold back until he gets answers. Shaken, Hans asks Snock what they should do now, and Snock says there's only one choice left: fight. Hans draws his sword and charges, telling Snock to watch his back as he pushes toward the enemies ahead of him. Trading blows, Hans realizes his opponent is really strong. Snock uses Nothem's power to lift rocks, then hurls them at one of the men, hoping to stop him. The stone smacks the hooded man right in the face, and Snock wonders if that did enough. Hans quickly realizes this is a terrible place for Snock's power, and at this rate they'll die. Then his opponent lands a hit. Hans drops his guard for a second, and a kick slams into his stomach. The force sends him flying. Two hooded men move in right away to attack again, and Snock panics. Hans barely blocks the strike with his sword. His enemy sneers that he knew they weren't the ones who beat his captain. Pushing himself to the limit, Hans knows he can't keep this up much longer. He glances at Estelade beside him, and wonders what would happen if he could take it, if he might become like Zich. So Hans changes his move and knocks his opponent back, then grabs the sword's hilt, determined to save Snock too. The hooded men mock him and tell him to accept that he's a loser. Meanwhile, Snock is on the ground with nowhere left to go. Hans thinks about how he also believed the sword would never choose him, then remembers what Zich told him the other day: you only give up when you're dead. Until then, you do whatever it takes to survive, even if your hope is hanging by a thread. With everything he has, Hans finally pulls it free, and Estelade is now in his hands. The hooded men stare in shock, asking how a boy like him could be judged worthy, while hope returns to Snock's face, and he breaks into a huge smile. Hans feels the sword's power rushing into his body. The hooded men panic and charge in, refusing to let him get used to it. Xiaobei shouts a warning. Hans braces himself and gets ready to fight with everything the sword gives him. Somewhere else, Zich and Lila appear inside that same storm of light. The protagonist looks around, confused, and says this place feels a lot like the one from before. Beside him, Lila tries to use her power but admits her teleportation won't work. Since they're stuck, the two decide to look around. As they walk, Zich asks why she came there, and why the hooded people were chasing her. Lila just stares at the ground. Annoyed, he asks if she's really going to ignore him after he saved her. At last, she answers that she doesn't really know why, because most of her old memories are gone. Before she can explain more, pain shoots through Zich's hand again. Lila turns to him, and he says his hand suddenly hurts. She looks confused. He doesn't seem hurt at all, then asks where the pain is. MC says his fingers feel like they're burning. She grabs his hand and guesses it might be some hidden injury from a thorn, but then she notices something on his middle finger. Shocked, she asks if that's the key that twists destiny. Back with Hans, the fight against the hooded men keeps going. He grips the sacred sword without fear, and keeps attacking so fast they can't catch a break. The enemies start running for their lives. Then an explosion blasts debris everywhere. Hans stays ready, waiting to see if it's really over. The sword fills him with such power that he feels like he could beat anyone. But when the enemies stand back up, he realizes this won't be so easy. First, he forces himself to calm down. He knows from experience that losing focus in a fight is the fastest way to lose. So Hans steadies himself and reads the field. One hooded man steps forward and calls this a disaster, saying he never thought he'd need that trick against a loser. He rushes Hans, as purple light pours from his body. Xiaobei desperately tells his friend to be careful, and Hans's eyes go wide. Now he's facing a monster like the one Zich fought in the other city. The creature grins, bearing huge fangs, and that alone makes Hans break into a cold sweat. The man-turned monster attacks at once. Hans lifts the sacred sword and drives it hard into the ground. A blinding flash bursts out, forcing the monster to cover its eyes, though it still tries to push forward. Then light explodes again. Hans is glad to see the beam has settled down a little, but the monster is still standing without a scratch. In his head, Hans admits he already knew he couldn't fight like Zich, who dropped one of these things in a single hit. A second later, he realizes this one may be even stronger, and comparing himself to him was foolish. The creature charges again, then leaps in and throws a crushing punch. Hans gets the sword up in time to block it, and starts thinking maybe he really can win. With the sword in hand, he can finally use the techniques Zich taught him. The monster keeps pressing, trying to overpower him. Hans switches plans and jumps back, making it lose balance. Furious, the creature screams and calls him an arrogant bastard. Hans decides this is the moment to end it, and cuts the monster's head clean off. Its allies see it happen, and start to panic. Hans turns to the rest and rushes them, striking them down one after another, while remembering Zich's advice to always find the enemy's weak point as fast as possible, and kill them the second. An opening appears. When it's over, Hans is left gasping for air. He looks back around, making sure no one can catch him off guard. Then he lifts the sword and cheers, and Snock celebrates with him. Snock says Hans really was worthy of the sacred sword. Then one of the hooded men starts to rise again, and asks if Hans really thinks he won. He says they're both doomed anyway, because a nightmare is coming to swallow the sea and everyone living there with it. Back with Zich and Lila, she asks if his finger still hurts. Holding a small blue twig, he says he's fine now, because he drank a potion. Lila stares at the twig with a strange look. The protagonist asks if she knows anything about it. She says something about it feels wrong, though she can't tell if she actually knows why. That's when Zich realizes she isn't pretending to have lost her memories. Suddenly, the tiny twig comes alive and points somewhere. MC notices at once, and even though he's confused, tells Lila they need to keep moving for a while. He adds that he still has a lot he wants to ask her. Any small detail about her could matter. Lila agrees and says she'll answer whatever she can. For now, Zeke says, they should start walking. So they follow the direction the twig points. A little later, Lila impatiently asks if he's figured out what he wants to ask. He says yes, but she warns him he only gets 3 questions. He can't believe it, and says that's way too few. Then he asks what happens if she doesn't know an answer because of her missing memories. Lila looks sad, but says not to worry. She's sure she can answer 3. Zich doesn't wait and asks what her real name is. A little surprised, she says she already told him. Lila, he says he thought she made that up the first time. Then he asks if her name isn't Core, since that's what the hooded men called her. She shakes her head and repeats that her name is Lila. Zich rubs his chin, unsure what to make of that, because he still thinks there must be a reason they called her Core. Now he wonders if she ever had a different name before, so he moves to a harder question, and asks how she knew all that stuff from earlier. Lila answers right away. She sees dreams about the future of 2 people. One is the hero of the sun, who protects the world with the sacred sword. The other is the demon king, who uses the demonic sword. In those dreams she feels what they felt, and sees what they went through. Zich asks how those dreams end, and she says the ending is always different. Sometimes the demon king wins, and other times the sword hero wins. There are also futures where both die, or where something else happens and they never even clash. Still, in most futures they do fight. When Zich asks if she knows anything else about the future, Lila says no, her memories are broken. He asks why, but she starts walking away and says she already answered 3 questions. The protagonist puts a hand on her shoulder and says he still has one left. Turning back, Lila asks why he cares so much about her, when she thought they were alike. After all, she thinks he's trying to become the demon king, because he learned things from the future too. That catches MC off guard. He had no idea she'd been thinking that. He realizes that while he suspected she had regressed, she believed he was seeing the future in dreams, and tied it all to him and Glenn Zennard. Remembering her words, Zunch wonders why, out of every possibility, she saw the one where he died. He doesn't even notice the strange look on his face. Stepping forward again, he says he still has a question, and Lila asks if he finally knows what he wants to ask. He walks right up close and lightly asks what her favorite color is, like it's the most serious thing in the world. Lila is clearly thrown off. She expected anything but that. Zeke shrugs and asks if she forgot that too. She says her favorite color is white, but she has no idea why he asked. As he passes her, the protagonist says that's why she called herself Lila. Then he adds that he doesn't need to know anything else. His curiosity is satisfied. But then he changes course and asks if she really saw many futures. Lila says yes, though she can't remember the details. Zeke follows with one more question. Does she think he'll become the Demon King? Lila folds her arms and says she doesn't think so, which surprises him. Still, she isn't sure, because she doesn't know whether he's on a path she has already seen. In every future she remembers, he never managed to lift the sacred sword. Smiling, Zico asks if that means he's on a road she doesn't know. Lila says yes, and that's exactly why he should keep the sacred sword and stay away from Fornium. MC refuses, saying he likes the demonic sword more. Then he tells her to stop. Something ahead feels different. Far away, back in the city, the leader of the hooded group watches the people below from a mountain. Two subordinates interrupt him, and he instantly understands the mission failed. Kneeling, they apologize and report that the search team hasn't returned, and they can't contact them. The leader goes quiet for a moment, then says it's time for Plan B, since Plan A failed. He looks back toward the people below and says they're all living in peace, clueless about what's coming. What a pity, he says with a chilling smile. Back at the inn, Hans is asleep, but Snog lies awake, staring upward. Worried, he asks if Hans is sleeping. With his eyes still closed, Hans asks why. Snog wonders if he really thinks Zich is okay. Hans says yes, his master has never lost a fight. Snog agrees, but points out that it's already been a full day since he left. Hans turns to Snog and says the best thing they can do is rest now, so they'll have the strength to act later. Zich can handle himself, and with a mage beside him, Hans says there's no reason to panic. Snog smiles, and says that makes him feel better. Then Hans admits he's actually more worried about something else from that fight, the warning about a disaster coming to the city. Snog figures the man was just trying to scare them, and Hans says he hopes so too. Still, he asks what Snog would do if the worst really happened. After all, Snog can hardly defend himself. The boy admits he'd be terrified, but he'd still help anyone he could. He says he promised not to dump his burden on others, so he can't just run because things look bad. Hans tells him that's the right answer. In his heart, he knows he can't run either, not after being chosen by the sacred sword. Then something suddenly grabs his attention. Both boys rush to the window to check outside. Someone is screaming for help, and monsters have flooded the city. With fire spreading, the townspeople scatter in panic, trapped on every side. The boys stare in shock, wondering if this is the nightmare that Man warned them about. Somewhere else, Zich and Lila keep moving forward. The protagonist senses something nearby and grabs his sword, ready for an attack. A movement above makes both of them look up. Lila quickly warns Zich. A weird bubble-covered creature drops in to attack, snapping a tentacle at him. MC reacts at once and slices the tentacle clean in two. He rushes the creature next, and it bursts apart. Zich asks what that thing was. His blade barely felt any resistance. Lila looks ahead and warns that more are coming. One attacks right away, making him dodge fast to avoid the hit. He guesses they're slime-like monsters, whose jelly bodies let them slip past attacks. As another strike comes in, Lila fires Larwell Rod, but the creatures open holes in their bodies and avoid the spell without a scratch. Zich groans that these things are basically immortal, and this is getting annoying. He asks if Lila knows anything about them, but she comes up blank. Growing tired, the protagonist says they still don't even know where this path goes. Then he asks how long they've been down here. Lila wonders if he's worried about the boys, but Zich brushes that off and says he trained them well. They're talented, just aiming a little too high. That throws Lila off for a second. Then she realizes what he means. While fighting, MC confirms it. Hans and Snog want to become heroes. Lila doesn't think that dream is impossible, especially with him guiding them. Zich replies that he knows heroes better than anyone. Back to the fight. Lila says either way, if the boys dream that big, they need to move fast. Back in the city, the fires are still raging. A giant monster chases a small child, and the boy trips and slams into the ground. Now he's trapped with the creature right behind him. In tears, he can only wait for death until Hans jumps in front of him and saves him, proving a strong sense of justice can be more dangerous than fear. It's the one thing that pushes a person past their limits. Still surrounded by slime monsters, Zich says this place must be their base. Lila attacks again with another spell, filling the area with a bright yellow flash. It almost catches him too, but he leaps away just in time. When it clears, every creature is gone, leaving only smoke behind. Zich asks if she nearly blasted him on purpose, and Lila says she knew he'd be fine. The twig in his hand points one way again. The protagonist says they're close now, and Lila says she can feel an energy ahead. So the two of them hurry deeper into the cave. When they reach the end, MC stares ahead and asks what he's looking at. In front of them is a strange sword made from plant roots. Zich is stunned and wonders if that can really be called a sword. Then the little twig suddenly floats up, drifting toward the weapon and fitting perfectly into one of its roots. Both of them can only stare. A bright green glow flares to life. Zich asks what's going on, but Lila says she has no idea. She never saw this in any dream. When the light settles, the sword looks complete. Lila says it feels like the weapon is calling to him. He steps closer, thinking he's finally found where the key of destiny came from. Then he reaches out to pull the sword from the ground. As he grips it, he thinks it feels warm, almost like holding someone's hand. With little effort, Zich draws the sword free. The moment he does, he feels a strange bond with its power, and is shocked when its mana starts mixing with his, sending a huge surge through him. That energy swells into a glowing green and blue sphere, pulsing like a heart about to burst. Zika's eyes widen as the power suddenly spikes, and Lila throws up a guard as an explosion blasts dust and debris everywhere. Unhurt, she waits for the dust to clear, trying to figure out what just happened to the protagonist and the sword. When she sees him again, holding a sword now glowing only blue, she finally relaxes. Zik is just as amazed, saying he's never felt this much power in his hands before. Back in the city, the streets are still full of fear and destruction. Hans keeps holding a monster back, worn out and barely standing, while yelling for the child to run. The boy flees in tears, thanking him as he goes. Hans is clearly at his limit, sweating, gasping and shaking from the strain. He barely dodges a crushing blow, then kills the creature. Right after that, he shouts to Snook and tells him to get the people outside the gates. Nearby, 2 guards are also battling giant monsters, but the fight is getting worse as more keep showing up. Hans tries to think of a way out. Then Snook returns and says everyone's been evacuated, so Hans tells him to seal the gates. Snook uses no one's power and raises a wall of stone to block the entrance. The monsters slam against it in a rage. Hans praises him, then says they just have to finish the ones still inside. Without delay, he charges in with the sacred sword, while Snook sends sharp rocks shooting up from the ground, and the guards join the attack. After a while, a green-eyed boy reports that most of the monsters are down. Hans finally smiles in relief. Reinforcements arrived during the battle and helped clear out the creatures. But Hans tenses again and wonders if this was really the hell that Hooded Man talked about. Then a heavy explosion shakes the ground, and everyone turns in alarm. A bright light and rolling smoke spread fast, freezing everyone in fear. Heavy footsteps come out of the haze, followed by another wave of savage monsters marching toward them. The guards shout for Hans and Snook to fall back as they move to shield the boys. But a sword suddenly drops from above and cuts them down in one blow. Hans and Snook watch in horror, unable to believe how fast things just got worse. A hooded figure walks forward, calm and threatening, with the bloody sword in hand. Hans notices the same black cloak worn by the group they fought at the ruins. The stranger spots the sacred sword in Hans's hands and immediately grows serious. With a dark stare, he asks who Hans is. Hans doesn't back down and raises the glowing blade. His thoughts race. How does this man know that sword? And what does that mean right now? He quickly decides the stranger must be one of the black-cloaked men from the ruins, and that thought cuts him off cold. All around him, the battle is falling apart. One soldier is torn down without any chance to fight back, while another gets struck from behind before he can react. A cold sweat runs down Hans's face as he forces himself to stay focused. But with that enemy standing before him, and those giant creations closing in, it's almost impossible to think. One soldier orders the others to kill the cult leader and drive him out before more people die. The men rush him at once, determined to end it. The hooded figure watches them without looking away, giving off a terrifying confidence, and quietly grips his sword. With a single swing, he drops 3 attacking soldiers, showing just how overwhelming he is. One survivor gasps that it's impossible. The enemy doesn't even react, he just keeps cutting everyone down. Around him, the giant monsters do the same, towering over both the soldiers and the boys. One warrior starts shaking, sure this is the end. Then Snook yells for him to duck, and sharp stone spikes burst from the ground to strike the monsters. Hans rushes in next, and tells Snook to leave the last creature to him. Snook moves to a nearby soldier and hands his sword back, and the man thanks him through trembling breaths while his captain looks on. Snook tells the warriors to regroup, reminding them that every one of them matters right now. Then Hans gives the order to charge, ready to fight to the very end. Even the leader of the knights is shaken by how badly the battle has turned. While those 2 kids fight with everything they have to save the kingdom, this should have been Snook. He calls on no one's power again, and raises another massive boulder. It shows just how unnatural his strength really is. A little less shaken now, the knight leading the others starts to think they might still have a chance. Then he yells at his men not to give in to fear, because the heroes are fighting beside them and they won't retreat. The fight keeps raging, without a break, that even catches the cult leader off guard. He never expected this much courage and pushback from the soldiers. Meanwhile, his prized creatures keep getting crushed and cut down, losing power fast. Hans keeps hold of the sacred sword the whole time, steady and fully resolved. Then Hans senses someone closing in from behind, and spins at once. He manages to stop the hooded man's attack. Now that enemy is set on killing him. The man's eyes widen when he realizes the secret sword may be stronger than he is. He demands to know why SFLA chose a mere boy to carry it. Sometime later, back where the hooded group was defeated before, the yellow tornado of light appears again. It brings Zich and Lila back, and Lila says they really did return to where they left off. She agrees, and MC asks if she was just trusting her gut this whole mission. Lila says no, the sword's special link to that place is what made it happen. He is taken aback and asks how she knows that. Looking at the glowing blade, Lila admits that part of it was instinct. She trusted what she felt. Zich wonders what kind of sword could pull them there, then bring them back once it was taken. A moment later, he realizes something bad is happening in the city. Lila asks what he means, and the protagonist says, dark forces have invaded the place. They need to move fast and find out what's happening before it's too late. Seeing the dead hooded figures, MC wonders if Snook and Hans did this, and if those 2 ran into the worst of it. Then he suddenly notices something is wrong. When he looks back, the sacred sword is gone, and the energy he feels there belongs to Hans. Syke turns to Lila and says they have to leave right now to check on something urgent, but then he sees her expression, gets alarmed, and asks what's wrong. cold sweat running down her face. Lila says this is all because of her voice full of guilt and despair. She realizes that group was after her the whole time, and they invaded the city to capture her for a larger plan. So that's where this video ends. If you don't want to miss the next part, turn on the notification bell, and I'll see you next time.